She helped me, like, even when I was eating, she's like, okay, I'm sweating. I'm not gonna walk in or something. It's okay. It's okay. I have to show y'all engagement photos. I gotta see. It's okay. It's it's a different comfort zone.
Okay, good evening again. It is 6:32 and we are here for our work session. And so we're going to call the meeting to order. Dr. Thomas, if you would take roll for us.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Davis?
Here.
Ms. Gallagher?
Here.
Mrs. Davis?
Here.
Dr. Yeager? Dr. Dodson?
Here.
Dr. Anderson? Dr. Beard?
Here.
Attorney Lowell?
Here.
Dr. Matters?
Here.
Thank you. Okay, we have a quorum. We'll move forward with item number 2, and that is to amend and or adopt the agenda. The floor is open. Okay.
Second.
That was Dr. Anderson for the motion and Dr. Maddox for the second. Any questions or discussion? Okay, all in favor of adopting the agenda, if you would show by raising your hand and saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Okay, any opposed and any abstain? Okay, so that motion carries. Our agenda is listed before us. We will move forward to item 3. These are our informational items. Item 3.1, the early Head Start Policy Council meeting minutes and reports. Okay. Having a little trouble here. with my document. Any questions, comments? Dr. Anderson, could you turn your microphone on in front of you by pushing? Yeah. Hello? Good, thank you.
I had just one quick question about the attendance rates that I think was somewhere down in maybe page 11 or 12, they were listing the attendance rates by location. And it looked like the majority of them were well below the expected rate of 85%. And so I just wondered if that will impact any sort of reporting or compliance or funding, just to kind of make sure we're on top of that.
It will not impact our funding if it were ongoing. It could, impact our seats, but due to the pandemic, there's an expectation that there will be reduced attendance due to illness, and in this case, in cases of virtual attendance, the capacity to do so. We count them as present if they're there in the live session. Many of our students are able to view it after the fact, but that doesn't count into their attendance, but it does count toward them being able to be participating in the lessons. thank you, that's a good question.
Sorry, I didn't look at you. I didn't know you were over there. I was like,
To be fair, I'm looking from that side.
If I can have a follow-up question.
Yes, sir.
So these numbers represent some are virtual, some are in person?
So those numbers actually represent a month in which we were 100% virtual. There was, we are now back to face-to-face for our entire Head Start program. And so those numbers, attendance numbers are higher during face-to-face.
So the October numbers were face-to-face?
Our October numbers
More or
were
less.
higher.
Yeah.
We are looking forward to being back 5 days a week.
Any additional questions or discussion around the report that was provided? Okay, we'll move forward to item 3.2. This is our Athens Community Career Academy report.
I would just like to commend the Dogs for Pups. If I understand it correctly, they raised about $100,000 for mobile hotspots. Am I reading that right? Come Yeah, I thought they had distributed the money, but I thought the money came. I'm confused.
Which report are you referring to?
Oh, I was, this, oh, I'm sorry, I am sorry, I jumped the gun. Okay.
So I was commending Career Academy, for getting the reports in so that we can have them every month. That was really good. Thank you. I learned a lot about what's happening there.
All right. Okay, we'll move forward. And this is our SPLOS monthly report.
Who actually offers that report?
What was that, Ms. Evans?
Who offers the SPLOS monthly report? Is that someone on staff or is that me? John Gilbert. Okay, all right, thank you. I was curious, all right, thank you.
Did you have any additional questions regarding the report?
Always there, always thorough, thank you.
Any others? Based on what's been shared with us? All right. We'll move forward to section 4, and these are our board and community reports. We'll start with our Athens Area Community Foundation.
Now, can I make my comment? Anyway, I think it's fantastic that the Dogs for Pups were able to do that. And I just, that's tremendous. I just think they need to be applauded.
That's awesome. Go ahead, Dr. Manis. Oh, okay. Any additional comments? All right. Okay, we are moving forward to item 4.2. But I didn't have anything in this area. I don't know if it was just me or. Okay.
So I don't believe I supplied a report, but I can give an oral report.
Okay.
So the last meeting was March 9th. We were told that the high school tracks are completed on time. We've got some beautiful photos of the track. If you haven't seen the Cedar Shoals track, it's gorgeous blue. We were told that the board office's plans have been, a site manager's been hired, I believe, to assist with plans for the board offices. The Clark Middle School, local building committee will meet April 13th. That's an open meeting, I think, if you need to go. We were updated about the West Broad meeting that will be coming, that was last night, or right before last. We also got a thorough review of the air quality work that they've been doing at the school. And the document that came out just recently summarizes some of that work, but it was a very thorough review and the committee was very proud. There are 2 new members of the committee, but they're still looking for more members if anyone is interested. Finally, the receipts for the tax receipts are up again this month, which is excellent, and they received a clean financial audit. That's the end of my report.
All right, thank you, Dr. Yeager. Are there any follow-up questions for Dr. Yeager? Dr. Yeager, you mentioned air quality report.
So there was I think it was called an infographic that was provided. I think we all got a copy of it. It was a one-pager that summarized all the work that they were doing with air quality, was made for public consumption. I think we distributed it.
Okay, yes, I
I
think.
can send it to you again. Yeah, it was just a one-pager that summarized everything.
Was
But
this,
I was
was this
told that
something?
they're buying new MERV 13 retrofits for some of the buildings. They're doing whatever they can to each of the buildings to improve air quality inside of each building, but of course each building is a little bit different. So it was a very fine-tooth comb process that he described, going through each building and each room to see what the best mediation for air quality would be.
Okay, thank you. We'll move forward to Envision Athens. And I don't think I have
I did not
any.
submit a report. I will, using Dr. Madison's wonderful concise format, do a report and we'll have it by next week.
Okay, are there any, just sort of verbal updates that we need to be aware of?
We're still doing full force with the neighborhood recognition program. I think you get an email every week about that, and so I'm ready with that. But we're definitely looking to recognize people in the community that have gone, have actually exhibited the behaviors and the qualities that we're looking for in our Good Neighbor campaign. So if you know someone, they may not even know that you've noticed that they're doing good things, just submit their names and they'll get recognition countywide for their work that they're doing in the community. So it's a really good time to give somebody an award. So I would encourage us to do that. Beyond that, Envision Athens is extremely busy. They are meeting every day in one of those subcommittees and one of those initiatives. And I think the next meeting, the big one that's coming up, is Educate Athens in the next couple of weeks. And that's where, really trying to spend some extra time to see what's coming down the pipe countywide around educational issues. The health and safety has done really good. I know that they've done a phenomenal job with there's a whole program out there now so that lay people are being taught to prevent death from overdoses. And so I can't remember the name of that drug. It's pretty good. Yeah, so people can actually administer that. So there's training going on for that, but there's a huge consortium of people in the community, all the health providers and nonprofits that are working to make sure that we can reduce fatalities from overdoses. And so I thought that was very, very moving too. So that group has reached another milestone. So those are the two that happened in the last week or so.
Okay. Thank you for that update. Any questions? Further discussion? Okay. We'll move forward to item 4.4. This is the Georgia School Boards Association. I don't have any, but Mr. Davis, if you can fill in what I don't have.
Well, I would like to point out, particularly to our new members, Lisa sent out, I think yesterday or today, information about the National School Board Association conference. And I know up until last year, the only people that had But this is virtual this year, and the information has been emailed to you, and so it's a commitment, but it is a well worth, even virtually, I think it would be a very beneficial if you have those 2-3 days to be able to participate, it would be well worth it.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Ms. Davis?
So, at one time, we voted for people to go to NSBA because of the expense, I think it was, is that right? That was our only reason for doing that.
To do what now?
Didn't we vote for people to go to NSBA?
Yeah, there was always
There was always an expense,
but
right?
I think we just signed up. I don't remember ever being voted on. I think if everyone had decided to go, we would have busted the budget, so we would have had to have voted.
I know the first few years we did do a vote on that to protect our budget, but now I know from our finance committee meeting that we haven't spent one dime on travel, so, and development, so I don't think there's a cost for addition. But I just want to know procedurally, should we vote to spend that money and for
Right. I know that but now this, probably predates like the newer people, but last year, when we signed up, it was going to be myself, Dr. Maddox, and Dr. Dartmouth, or no, Dr. Barrett, I think it was. And, of course, with the pandemic, it was canceled. But that didn't come through a vote, that was just, thinking that everyone at some point needed to at least experience it. I know that there was Ms. Palmer sent an email to us, it looks like they had extended the recent deadline.
When we did the budget, we approved for 3 board members to go.
Okay.
Thank you, I knew there was a limit somewhere.
And then I think speaking of the budget, and this may come up later, but as it relates to the professional, or the money, the professional development money that I would imagine that would fall under, I think there have been some changes to adjust for our history, what we needed this year and what we anticipated needing in the future. Is that correct?
Is that when you did the budget for the department?
Okay,
I think we keep that, in line with what we've done in the past,
Okay.
and then adjust for any cost increases.
okay.
I would just add, I'm on the website looking at it, and there's about only 3.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So does that include the 3, or does that raise it to 6?
Probably, well, I don't know, I'm guessing 6 at this point.
Where is it located?
It's
It's virtual, so that would take it to 6, yes.
Yeah, because you don't have to worry
Right,
about.
have to do travel
flight
and
hotel,
everything,
right.
right.
It just has to be purchased by tomorrow to get the.
That's why I brought the vote, because if we need to vote, we need to do that tonight.
Well, if somebody's interested in going, certainly, I mean, just say it, and then Ms. Palmer, particularly since that's already budgeted.
So I could go for 1 day, but I can't go the second day, and I let Lisa know that. I mean, I would love to attend the 1 day, I just feel like that would be a waste of a registration if I could only attend 1 day. But maybe we could pay for 1, and somebody could do the second day. I don't know.
Do they have so they don't have a partial?
They do not.
Well, you can always have them send you the video of the second one, and you can share that out.
Okay, we didn't have that.
I would definitely not, don't let that be within the source, yeah, it's worth it.
So then I would like to register for it.
Okay, so Dr. Anderson, Ms. Hull, and, Ms. Gallagher, are you all interested?
So I'm gonna do the one, and it should be free, and then follow the next day.
Okay, oh, the second day of hers, okay. So it's still sort of one, okay. Ms. Palmer, did that, okay.
Fantastic.
I think it's,
What's the date again? It's not like April.
8 through 10.
Okay. All right. Other thoughts, questions about School Board Association?
we skipped over to the national board.
Yeah.
The Georgia registration one doesn't open until later this month, so we have some time to decide on one.
sure when that one opens, actually. Mr. Davis, do you know?
I think the registration is the 24th of April, but the conference isn't until June.
Okay.
But it wasn't clear on the website if it's in person or virtual. So that part, some people may be uncomfortable traveling.
Right, I was thinking it was virtual, but I can't be fully sure. I'm happy to check that. Okay.
You know, that reminds me, of probably, Blue Pass, I don't remember getting any email from Georgia School Board Association about I forgot the name of the committee that oversees
Not the delegate assembly, no.
that introduces the new legislative platforms.
Right.
So I have not gotten anything from them, so, normally by the time I have.
That would normally happen during this time though, right? During that summer. Yeah, I know the last time I talked to, I think it was Julie, they were on the fence of trying to figure out like if it was gonna be in person, like the meeting itself, but I don't think I have any information either, but I can check.
I'll just send you an email.
Okay.
Did you get the email about nominations for officers? Is that when they install those at that conference?
I did not think so.
I think I got that email.
That email about nominations, that's one that I saw.
Mm.
But I don't know if in terms of platform, in terms of additions to the GSBA legislative agenda, if people have any ideas or suggestions, I mean, it has to pass through this board, but we can certainly entertain them and vote on them next week. Anyone wants to look at what's on the agenda, legislative agenda on the Georgia School Board Association website, and see if there are some oversights. We have, the new board members, we have successfully impacted that legislative agenda really for the last 3 years. So we've done something on TRS, we've done something on tuition for immigrant, for our DACA students, and we did another thing. So anyway, if you are so inclined, you can always call me and I can bring you up to speed about what's involved in that.
Thank you. And Ms. Palmer just sent us out an email, and it looks like the conference is going to be a blended model of online as well as in-person experiences for this summer.
Still in Savannah?
What was that?
Is it in Savannah?
Yes, I think so. Did we ever look at it? Yep, it is, at the same place. All right, we'll move forward with item 5, and this is the board president's report, or remarks. Just a few things. I just wanted to follow up because I don't want our committee work to, I don't want us to forget about that. I want to be sure we're updating the public on what's going on. I know that we've been, we're sort of in this pattern where right now we're still serving on the committees that we were on. And at some point we will assume the new committees, but we are still in the process of modifying policy. And so that is really where we are. I hate to give a hard date. We were hoping, I think we mentioned maybe by March or April, but we have not solidified that policy yet. And by solidified, I mean having it going through the full process of policy, as well as being put out for the public to be able to read through and share any comments. So once that happens, we will assume our new roles on the particular committees that were outlined. But I just wanted to provide an update with that. Just a notice that we will have professional development as it stands right now, the 4th Thursday of this month. I do apologize that I have not been able to be a little bit more structured, but there have been a lot of different moving pieces that I won't get into at the meeting, but, we will be meeting, and, I'll update you on, the presentation, but it's still the same time, the fourth Thursday at 6. I have also spoken with, Julie and about our self-assessment. So if you go back to our original Cognier report as well as our self-assessment, part of that directive was not only to do self-assessment or evaluation, but to do them twice a year. And so we've done one, and so around the summer would be, I think, an ideal time, since we will be possibly having a retreat and, doing some professional development and team building. And so I wanted to go ahead and get your availability for July. I know July is sort of iffy because I think when we came on the board, I don't think the board was meeting in July, but sometimes they would still have to meet in July for HR-related issues or concerns or action that needed to be taken. And so I wanted to ask you if you would check your calendars for July. And this is very tentative. Of course, I'll probably reach out to one person to try to help put these pieces together, but we're also, like, even if we identify a date, we still have to have, like, professional development, so that has to work for the presenters and things like that, but I at least want us to have a working date to go by. And so, I wanted to see if, by chance, you all had July the 22nd, and that just really falls in line with the fourth Thursday. It doesn't have to be that, but it is consistent with our professional development dates now. So, wanted to see if you had either that fourth Thursday, like the 22nd, or the 24th, or something around that time. Our retreat the last time was, I think it was an evening, 6 until 9-ish, or something like that, a Friday into a Saturday. It doesn't have to be that way, but I'm just trying to get an idea of like what availability you all have, and Dr. Thomas, that you have, and I know you'll be able to hopefully, let us know like which portions like cabinet would need to be there for, but just trying to get an idea of what days you have available in July. And also remind us that some of that work will be our self-assessment. And so what that means is that likely we'll get another self-assessment from GSBA a couple of months, maybe a month before, to complete. So are there any, do you have the 22nd of July available? Do you have some days that week, or even the week before that or after that? Or are there any dates that absolutely do not work? And again, we're generally talking about like a Saturday from around 9 until 1 or 2, and then an evening, some type of evening component, either on that Friday, or it could be on that Thursday as well, a 2 or 3 hour component.
So you're looking for 3 days, a Thursday and maybe a Friday.
It could be a Friday, Saturday. It technically could be a Thursday, Friday, Saturday. It could be a Saturday, Sunday. It could be really whatever we determine, but it does need to provide extended hours, I would say, to give us enough time to be able to process the self-assessment, but then also time to have a few more like team building and maybe some additional professional development. Yeah.
So we're going to the, that's not the last Saturday, the fourth Saturday? Is that the day that you're offering?
It is, and I don't know if it would be better, I know, Mr. Pruitt, I want to be sure we're walking an appropriate line. I'm happy to send out a doodle poll. It's just that we won't be able to like make the determination based, we'll be able to make it based on that doodle poll, but we'll need to make it in a public meeting. And so if that would be easier, that I collected like the dates that you absolutely are not available, if I get that from you first, I can do that. But Mr. Pruitt,
That's fine, I mean, typically you will let somebody in administration or some
I've got, a little bit of concern. The fourth Thursday of every month is something that I've been missing. You know, in terms, I have another meeting, and so I don't mind missing some of them, but if we can move our professional development monthly date somewhere with, you know, besides the fourth Thursday, that would be, you know, you just don't do it on a steady basis.
I think it depends on the board, and so this, you know, if I'm not mistaken, I think there was consensus around this at one of our public meetings, maybe last summer. And so, what was that? What was that, Mr. Davis?
I didn't think it was every month. It just kind of got to happen. We can occasionally break the habit. But
Yeah, it is a huge time commitment. And so I'll open the floor for board members. And it's a huge time commitment, I know, for board members as well as the district. And I think just to provide some context, where it came from was because we had so much work to do. And we still have work to do, but we've made a significant amount of progress. But there are still some areas that we could probably, if you go back and reference that report where it mentioned ongoing team building activities and, you know, just being sure that we're sort of, you know, engaging in that professional development. But again, it really is a board decision. If I recall, I think that at least the semester that we determined it, that third Thursday conflicted with, I think, one or two people's schedules at that time. But we, you know, we have new members and things like that, so the floor is open, and, you know, if the board feels that it's too many and you all don't want to do every month, you've had enough, or if you want to do, you know, if we need to change it, it really is a board decision.
I just want to say I'm not against doing it every month. When the Democratic Party meets on the fourth Thursday of every month, and so being a member, I'm missing every meeting. So that's all I mean, if that was the only date in the entire month that other people could do it, then I would certainly do it. But I'm just throwing that out there as.
Are we looking to have these meetings happen face to face or virtual or some type of hybrid?
You know, we really haven't talked about that since this is our first night back. So historically, they've been virtual. And maybe Mr. Pruitt can provide clarity. I mean, since it would be all of us, I guess technically, I mean, it's not a work session or a business meeting, but it is sort of a call meeting for professional development purposes. So I'm not sure what the parameters would be around that. I would think it could still be virtual. But Mr. Pruitt, are there any legal?
Everything is not already permitted to follow me. So, you know, anytime you're gonna get more together, it's follow me, whether you do it virtually or in person, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be both, make it both.
Okay. But because we've come back in person, does that mean those call meetings, such as those, have to be in person?
Oh, no, it's not that once you come back, you know, I heard that a couple weeks ago. It's not that you have to do every meeting in person.
Okay,
Some question?
so it'll be up to us. Ms. Davis, thank you, Ms.
We had
Pruitt.
retreats in the past, those have always, of course, been face to face, and we advertised those, and there were public papers maybe held at a place, you know, outside of this place, so that it's more conducive to the activities that we're trying to engage in. So I would like to see us employ that as a tactic if we're going to go face to face, to move away from the environment so we can have a creative.
You mean for the retreat, Ms. Davis?
For our professional development.
Oh, okay, for the monthly professional developments as well? Okay.
Dr. King, this is Dr. Ryan, these virtual meetings. So the reason we can do those is we've been under a state of emergency declared by the governor since last March, a year ago.
Okay. All right. And so we'll be able to do that as long as that emergency order is in place. Okay, so I hear Mr. Davis has shared that there are some challenges with him being able to make the monthly meetings, and Ms. Davis has also shared that there is a preference for a meeting in person, similar to how we've done previously with either professional development or our retreats. I just want to invite the board to share any thoughts or questions about that. And we don't have to decide tonight, I guess, but since we're talking about it, if you have any thoughts at the moment, please feel free to share them.
Actually, I do have a question. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to see. If we were to, is it possible, instead of spreading it out over 3 days, to do like a 2-day, like a 2 full day sessions, or a day and a half instead of spreading it out? Is that a possibility? Thank you.
Yep, it really, would depend, and I think last semester, we just sort of put together, we knew Saturday was the previous time, that was like the extended day. And so we tried to keep that Saturday open, for if we had to do like a 9 to 3, but I think we ended up finishing maybe at 1 or 2.
And we could put a board development, or professional learning in conjunction with part of the retreat.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Dr. Manichu? So what I'll do is, Ms. Palmer, if you don't mind, Dr. Thomas, if you all could send us, maybe do a Google poll, and we can maybe work together and just throw out a couple of dates, and then maybe we can go from there. And that way, when we finalize the date, we can just bring it back to the meeting and finalize the date, and then we'll start putting the pieces in place for the retreat. I will, as I finish putting the professional developments in place, I do hear you, Mr. Davis. I haven't heard any additional discussion around that, so I'm not really sure how to move other than like continue to have them on the 4th Thursdays, and maybe if it's something that you can't make, maybe if we're on virtual, then maybe we can record it.
Well, I'm just throwing it out there since people haven't expressed themselves, but is it possible to have it on the 3rd Thursday?
I'm fine with that. As of now, the only commitment that I have would be for the 1st and 2nd Thursdays.
I think it might have had to do with the policy committee meeting, maybe on the 3rd Thursday. I can't remember exactly what the issue with that was, but I mean, I am fine with that as well, if it doesn't conflict with other meetings.
And we're just looking at the month of July, or?
And this is just our remaining ones, and so ideally, this would mean April, May, and June. We've had to move around one of our providers, or cancel, or what have you, so, we have, I think, at least 2 of those dates tentatively, approved, but I think we could just go back to GSBA and see if they have the 3rd Thursday, and then one of the dates we still don't have the plans confirmed with the person who will be doing the professional development.
Thank you.
So Dr. Gann, would the goal be for 21-22 school year to try, so I guess starting July 1, that we would try to start doing quarterly instead of monthly? I know we had discussed that. I don't know if that would help with Mr. Davis, if that.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, but certainly it depends really on what the board is feeling.
Okay.
I know, I think based on our last report and the feedback we gathered, we have made significant progress with our professional development, which of course doesn't mean that we just stop, but I don't know that we have to go as heavy. Our work now really is around like refreshers, and some of those are the areas that the board reported that they were interested in last year. Like, you know, in addition to like team building, but more about the community. I don't know if you all remember when we sent out the email and said, hey, what would be some topics that you would like to see discussed at professional development? So to answer your question, Dr. Thomas, no, my thoughts are that we wouldn't do every month starting next school year, but that would be a board decision. And so if the board feels like, yeah, you know, we really need to continue with this, then we would. I think our focus really has to be on implementation, now and next school year. And maybe some team building, you know, and there may be different ways we can incorporate that, so we don't have to, you know, meet. But then also just on meeting the, hour requirement for whole board training, which I think is 9, right? Is it 9 hours? Okay, so 3 for whole board, and I'm pretty sure we could meet that, so no. I'll reach back out to GSBA and the other individual, and just to see what their availability is for 3rd and 4th, and then maybe we can go from there. And hopefully I'll be able to give an update by next week, and we'll go from there. Is that okay? All right, I think that is it for my remarks. Dr. Thomas?
Yes, ma'am, mine are brief tonight because I wanted to allot time for our budget presentation. But, one is the CARES funding, and we've already alluded to that, and we will be talking more in detail, but I know that's an area that people are wondering about. But when you have that amount of money, we want to be sure that we are very strategic and data-driven in how we determine to spend the funds and how we're monitoring the effectiveness of what we do with those funds. So you all will hear more about that tonight. Our return back has gone very well so far. Our staff received their 2nd vaccine yesterday, so people are really excited, and we're all sitting up. I see Dr. Gage in the crowd. We were a little concerned yesterday. We thought, oh, maybe we should have rethought this, but everyone is still upright right now, so we're excited about that. Air purifiers, we do have a purchase on today's budget agenda. We are going to ask to go ahead and make some of those purchases. Some have already been ordered because we want to be able to install in those areas, as Dr. Yeager referenced, where we have additional need. We want to get those in over the spring break next week so that those rooms will be covered when staff and students return. And I received a question from Dr. Gant about the disparity study. So just an update regarding that, the RFP closes on April 27th. After it closes, a team will evaluate and make a recommendation at the June board meeting. But keep in mind that once that's done, it still can take a year to a year and a half to actually get the results of that study. So I am going back and reviewing some of the steps that Athens Clarke County has taken, because it came up at the West Rock meeting this week about how do we ensure that we have equity in terms of those being hired to engage in the work on that property. And so that was a very good discussion that was held. So I'm going back to look at what options are there, and then I'll be speaking with Attorney Pruitt to make sure that we have legally defensible practices in place, but that we're able to also have diverse representation of those who are working in that area. I think that's it, Dr. Gant. You had asked about the infographic. Those are on our website, but I also shared a link with board members so that you can see the infographic for our HVAC and also the one called the Air We Breathe. That's been shared with everyone. So that concludes my report for this evening, and everything else will be covered in our budget presentation. And just related to the budget presentation, I did ask that tonight we have an opportunity to hear information and begin to synthesize that in your own minds, and then we will have a document where we will capture questions, and you can send your questions to Ms. Palmer. We're going to get those to all of our cabinet, and we will respond to them on that document, but we'll also, anything that needs clarification, we will respond verbally when we come back, and Mr. Schooneman will give a date for all of those next steps. But tonight, we just want everyone to hear it and just step back, let it sink in for a moment. Go home, study it, you know, and then ask us any questions you have. And we still have 2 months, 3 months almost, before we have to finalize.
By the end of June, we
Okay,
have
that's what I
approved
thought.
budget in place.
April, May, and June. So we have time, but we will be having very regular meetings so that you can get updated information and get any clarity that you need.
Thanks, Dr. Thomas.
Could I ask a quick question before you go into the budget?
Yes.
Just really.
Yes, ma'am.
So for the disparities study,
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to follow up with a question that I had about a month ago. Because the county is also doing a disparities study. And I'm wondering if there's a way to combine these efforts to save on costs and duplication of activities.
We did reach out to them about some of that and, have looked at different ways. I know Dr. Gannon and I talked to Mayor Gertz, and I'm not sure what the differences are, but it did not seem to be a viable option. And I can go back and try to study that a little more to see why we couldn't combine that study, but that was something we had looked at initially. And I could go and speak to, our county manager and try to get clarity on that again. But we did approach them, and they've been very good about sharing their information and resources with us, and then they hired I can't remember the title, but a staff person who's going to be handling that work for them and then putting some structures in place. So we have been collaborating and sharing information, but there was some reason that we could not do the study together, but I can get the specifics on that.
That's fine.
Mhm. Yes.
Just to touch base on the timing of this budget, although we do have a couple months left in terms of our window we gotta have it approved by, we have been working on this budget already for 6 months. So the budget module opened up in October. The operational expenditure side was due budgeted to finance by the end of December. And so we've been working on personnel and weaving together all the recommendations and additions basically for the last 6 months. So it's been a long work in progress, and really just like to acknowledge the hard work that my colleague Jennifer Frazier has put in, long tireless hours, as well as my fellow cabinet members too. I mean, we really approached it differently this year, and I think you'll see that in our presentation tonight. This is a budget that's not just finance. I mean, and really, I think my job as the chief financial officer is to say, hey, we have these available resources, and us collectively, along with Dr. Thomas, are going to share what initiatives that we're planning on presenting to you, either using general fund money or using the additional funds that we're going to talk about, either the ARPA or the CARES funds, to kind of layer on top and supplement what we are recommending to use with our general fund. So in this presentation, like I said, it's going to be a little bit different tonight because all of us are going to talk. I'm going to start off talking about our general fund budget overview, and I'm also going to look at other resources. And then after I talk about all of our resources, then we're going to split up and give each one of the cabinet members 5 to 10 minutes piece to share their initiatives. And then finally, at the end, we're just going to wrap it up and see where we're at right now in terms of dollars and cents. And really, the purpose of this presentation is not to get into and dig into the dollars and cents of the budget, but really just share those initiatives with you that we have right now and get feedback from you all. So if there's blind spots that we haven't looked at, if there's initiatives that you'd like us to look into and add to the budget, we want to present this to you early enough that we get feedback and potentially can weave that stuff into the budget within the next month or so. So overall, this is the timeline of the budget process. If I could have gone back another 3 months, I would have. So you see that first step there, operating budgets, revenues, and estimates. It really starts before January. It starts back in October. Right now, we're right on track at the end of March, at the beginning of April, whereas at a cabinet and the superintendent level, we have identified those initiatives, identified those additions and changes that we want to make to our budget. We've wrapped it up to the best of our ability, and we're sharing that with you tonight. Going forward, after we share these initiatives with you, we get some feedback. On April 13th, we're going to deliver all of the electronic documents to every member of the board. That's going to display and get into the detail on dollars and cents of everything. So in terms of questions tonight, I shared earlier today an Excel spreadsheet to enter in your questions by initiative. We'll look at that collectively as a cabinet and make sure that we address those questions to the best of our ability. And I think that will help with the timeliness of this presentation. I mentioned the April 13th distribution of the budget documents. After about a week, we will need to hold another call board meeting. In the past, Larry Hamill, I think, had a budget training session with the board where y'all received a big 3-ring binder of all of the documents, and there was a question and answer session. And I did talk to Mike, and Mike said, hey, whenever you have all the board members together, that's a call board meeting. So we really need to schedule a call board meeting to go through all of the details, the dollars and cents of this budget around April 20th in order to keep us on track to take into consideration any changes that you'll have, weave into the budget, and have a presentation for a tentative budget in May. And once you have a tentative budget in May, then you have to have meetings, you have to disseminate it, you have to have public meetings, advertise in the newspaper before final adoption in June. So that's kind of just an overview of what the timeline looks like with this budget. Before we get into it, I wanted to make sure that we all understand, even in the finance committee, we talk about buckets, and there's lots of different buckets that we have. Tonight, we're going to primarily be focused on our general fund bucket, and that's defined as Fund 100 for us. It's a governmental fund type used to account for all financial resources, except for those that have to be kept up with separately. And that's our debt service in funds 200, capital projects 300. All of our federal programs are kept up with a 400 series. All of our school accounts are kept up with a 500 series, and school food's kept up with a 600 series. So we have tons of different funds. Tonight we're going to be focused on our general fund, Fund 100, and the timing of this budget is going to cover fiscal year 22, which starts July 1st of 2021, and it goes for the next 12 months and ends June 30th of 2022. Where we're at right now, I'm estimating that we're going to start with our fund balance around $36.5 million. Between our revenue sources, we're going to bring in $171 million. Right now, we have slated to spend more than $171 million, but we're going to shift $6.5 million to CARES and ARPA, so that our overall expenditures that hit Fund 100, our general fund, match the amount of revenues that we're estimating. So we've got a balanced budget, and we're going to end exactly where we started at that $36.5 million. For our revenues, we've got 2 primary sources of revenue for our general fund. The first one is our property taxes. This is a diagram of the growth and decline of our school digest of the property, the taxable property in Clark County. And you can see in 2002 kind of steadily and slowly grew until it peaked in 2009. And then after the recession, it did kind of do a little roller coaster ride. And as you see, it's been increasing a little bit more and more, almost looks exponentially over the last few years. We've really seen a lot of growth in Clark County. I can't see that number. It's not really. Last year, we're looking at about $4.5 billion, and I think it's almost at $4.9 billion going into next fiscal year. That growth, it's made up of 2 components. You've got new growth, which you can see here in orange. It's tracked throughout the last 20 years or so. I thought it was quite remarkable. If you can see in 2021, new growth, which is new buildings, new houses, is pegged at 2%. And so we haven't seen growth at 2% since about 2008 or 2009. And once again, I just find that quite remarkable that we're there, given our circumstances, given the pandemic, given COVID, that we still had a growth rate of roughly 2%. So on top of that 2% growth, we also have an increase in value due to reassessments. And I have spoken to Jim Dunnigan, he's the chief appraiser with the county, and he did give us a kind of a safe estimate right now of 5%. They're still doing work, they're still evaluating property values. So that number could go up, but it's very unlikely to go down. So right now we've got a conservative estimate of 5% reassessment growth. So you tack those two together, and that's roughly 7% that we can count on as a school system. Here's a matrix of the millage rate over the last 5 years. It's been 20 consistently. You can see the value of 1 mill and how that's grown from 2016, that was fiscal year 17. The value of 1 mill is at 3.6 million. Now it's valued at 4.9 million. So we're estimated to tax, if we assess at 20 mills, the total school tax that we would be slated to assess is $97.7 million. That doesn't necessarily mean we're going to collect the full $97.7 million, because we have to account for delinquency, and we also have to pay the tax commission fees of 2.5%. So right now we've got our property taxes estimated at $94.5 million for FY22. The other big bucket for us is QBE. QBE is the state revenue that we receive, and it is driven by FTE. So it is driven by student enrollment. And one really important thing to drive home, if you look up on the screen, what's highlighted there over to the right, 2021, we saw a decrease in FTE of 4%. So that means our QBE funding is also going to decrease by 4% because our student population is decreasing. The funding from the state is going to do hand in hand with our FTE counts. So we've got to account for a 4% decrease in QBE as well as continued austerity. And while some of that austerity was given back to us at the second half of this current fiscal year, we still have $3 million of austerity that we have to account for next year. So that being said, taking into account that 4% decrease in FTE, and then also the $3 million of continued austerity, we're looking at $69.5 million of QBE revenue. We've got smaller buckets of revenue. I'd just like to lump it together in the other section. We've got TABT, which is the largest one at $4.4 million in other sales tax revenue. I think that's our transfer and intangible taxes at $1.5 million. Overall, those other kind of small buckets add up to a little bit more than $7 million. And when you look at all of our general fund resources, right now I estimate a little bit more than $171 million we'll have available in our general fund. So the state, a little bit more than 40%, our local, which is our property taxes, about 55%, and then that other category is a little bit more than 4%. And so in a typical year, we would stop there. We really want to focus on the general fund. That's what we're budgeting and presenting to you. But as you know, we have gotten awarded not only CARES 2 money, but we also have these new ARPA funds. So I think it's really important as we start building this budget to take into consideration those other sources of revenues we have, and how do we utilize those other resources to further our strategic plan. And we really want to be very focused and diligent in how we spend the additional resources, and be very strategic and align each one of those expenditures to our strategic plan. So overall, we had CARES 1, which is all budgeted right now. We've spent about half of it, but we will continue spending based on that budgeted plan, and we'll spend all of it within the next year or so. On top of that, we've got CARES 2. Both CARES 1 and CARES 2 are kept up with in 420, Fund 420, and then the new fund source, the American Rescue Plan Act, I'll call it ARPA, it's just a little bit easier, Fund 448. One thing that I want to really emphasize and really drive home is that these additional funds are not to replace our general fund resources. The intention of these additional resources is to supplement that spending. There's very specific purposes and areas that we have to spend that money, and it's not to be used to replace your general fund money. The only caveat to that is if you do have budget shortfalls due to austerity, which we do. We've got that $3 million of austerity from the state, so we're going to yank dollar for dollar $3 million there to cover that austerity, and then also to cover if we get a 4% decrease in QBE funding in a normal year, we would have had to have had a decrease in the number of staff that we had as a district just to make our ends meet. And so with these funds, we're really emphasizing keeping our staffing level the same. And so that's going to cost an additional $3.5 million on top of the $3 million. So this budget is built with $6.5 million taken from either CARES 2 or ARPA to essentially have a balanced budget. Here are those 8 categories that we can use the ARPA or CARES 2 money on. One, we can address at-risk student populations. We can invest in distance or remote learning, hotspots, devices, etc. School meals, we can spend that money on school meals. Also, mental health, and Jillian's going to talk about some of those initiatives that she has using CARES 2 or ARPA funds. Supplemental learning, Brandon's going to cover that piece. Facilities and equipment, what are we doing over and above? How are we changing our facilities? What kind of PPE do we need? We're looking into that, using those fund sources. Professional development, we can spend money with CARES and ARPA on professional development. And then finally, I did kind of go into detail that continuity of core staff and services. And so these are the general buckets, the areas that we're allowed to spend those additional resources on. Like I said, they're not there to replace your general fund, but to layer on and supplement your general fund expenditures. This is a powerful diagram, in my opinion, coming from a finance lens. Tonight, we're really looking at the general fund budget. Like I said, we've got 171, a little bit more, $1 million of general fund money to budget. That covers 4 quarters. So from July 1 until June 30th of 2022. And you can see the timing of the other 3 additional buckets there. So CARES 1, I say we've got it mostly, actually all budgeted, and we spent a little bit more than half. CARES 2, we have some great concepts of where we're going to go with that, but we don't have an official budget set yet with that $21.6 million. And we really haven't even started to think about the additional ARPA funds that we have. And ARPA has a little bit different qualifications and rules, and so I did mention earlier that we've got these 2 different buckets, and we're going to have to be strategic on which bucket they come from. And so thinking about how we develop a budget, each meeting that we have, whether it be for personnel or operating expenditures, we really want to be able to tie that back to our strategic plan. It should be rooted in equity, as you see all of the pillars are rooted in equity, and really have the ultimate goal of increasing student achievement at the end of the day. So not just general fund, CARES, ARPA funds should all surround and all further our strategic plan. And so that's our job as a cabinet. That's Dr. Thomas's job, is really how do we leverage all of these different resources to further our strategic plan. So what I'm going to do is invite each one of our cabinet members up here to give a little 5-minute talk. Brandon might do 10. Just talk about the initiatives that they have with both general fund money as well as the additional CARES to our ARPA funds. First, we've got Jillian, and when Jillian, when you're done, we did reorder this a little bit, just whoever's next, come on.
And I'll just add, there's like a lot that's coming up. We've talked about the strategic plan and we looked up and we're in April. So I told the team this school year is essentially over. So we are working, making some revisions, and we will bring that to you in the next months so we can just use it to begin the next school year. And that way the board isn't rushed and we're not having to do it. You will see, I think we were pretty much in agreement about the priorities. So it will just be looking at some of the specific strategies that the team will share with you. So we will bring those to next month's board meeting, but this is still aligned to what those priorities are that we have discussed.
Okay, thank you and good evening. So strategic priority 3 is climate and culture. And one of our overarching goals in this strategic priority is to provide a welcoming environment and positive school and district culture for students, families, and employees. As you can see here, we have the general fund, and these are some of our ideas about what we will do with this general fund money as it relates to climate and culture. So first, we're going to maintain having one nurse in each school. We're going to continue with that initiative. And as we have seen through this pandemic, they have led effortlessly us through this pandemic, and we've had vaccine drives, and they've just been leaders, and I want to give a kudos to them tonight. The second would be a new restorative practice program in-house to serve the entire district. We have decided to adopt the train the trainer model and have that as a part of our culture. And we are moving forward with the RFP process, and that is well underway. Number 3, a director of restorative discipline, to have someone that is laser focused on that piece, but also from a restorative lens. In addition, to have 2 additional school psychologists in every school. We know that this is a nationwide shortage, and it's also a high priority in Washington, so it's a high priority for us. We recognize that sometimes psychologists are placed in a test and place model, but we understand that they do more than that. They can provide consultation, they can do counseling and those types of services. And so giving these 2 additional positions will hopefully broaden their scope and lend those services, and we can keep them in-house. Lastly, diversity training. The work that has been done prior to as it relates to equity, we want to continue that. A part of that is not only what Byron just explained in terms of equity as our framework, but also it's about the training that we provide. And not only training for people who are here, but in our recruitment of how we recruit, how we retain, how we keep people here, and how we also shift the mindsets. At this moment, we are talking about what that training could possibly look like for us here in CCSD, but that is definitely a component of the general fund. With the CARES and ARPA fund, I mean, here we are in the middle of a pandemic still, and we know that there has been a lot of trauma that has impacted not only our students, but also has impacted adults that work with students, and we honor that, and we know that we have to honor that in the initiatives that we set forth. So, as you'll see, in A, it says 2 additional, and we're still toggling with the title of this, but roll with me, mental health or trauma specialist. This is a person or persons who will be focused on trauma initiatives in our school district. Again, not only for our students, but also for our staff. I want to just continue to say that because our staff are important. Specialists to address social emotional needs of students resulting from the pandemic, as well as our staff. Additional hours for nursing and contact tracing for staff. Student and staff wellness program to address mental health issues due to COVID, isolation, social unrest, and reacclimation into a typical day, as we know that we're trying to do. But we also honor the fact that folks struggle with that, just like we do, and we want to provide that that wellness opportunity for them to re-engage in. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
What's your vision of having the director of restorative discipline work with the hearing officer? Will they work hand in hand? Will that be a replacement to that person?
That's a good question. In my vision, the restorative discipline person will work with that person. Our hearings may shift from a restorative nature. That division would also lend itself to be a thought partner with the social services department, with the psychologist, with anyone in student services, and wrap around and our students in that process. One other key piece is we're making a shift in the student code of conduct, not a significant shift, okay, in terms of the matrix. But per our code or per our guidance from the DOE, it is important for us to really highlight in that student code of conduct the supports we provide to students. So those are things that we're shifting to in the student code of conduct. Not to say they weren't there before, but we're really highlighting those. What do those supports look like? So for example, I talked to you guys about that case consultation model that we've implemented, where students coming from DJJ, students coming from more restricted places, they come through this process. That now proposing will be in the student code of conduct. Because we have to understand that we are not the only ones reading the student code of conduct. Parents are reading that, people who work with families, and it's just fair for folks to know what are we doing to support students before we go to discipline. It is a definite continuum. We're not going to do that first, to discipline students. I hope that answers your question.
It does, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And also using that person to help with some PL, working with our schools on
Absolutely.
sensitivity and awareness and recognizing when there are other issues that are impeding that child's ability to be successful in the school setting. So while we recognize we need to maintain a safe environment, we also need to approach each incident in an individual way and being aware of what the needs of those students are. So we envision this person really not just being a thought partner with other district services departments, but with our principals and giving that professional learning to all of our administrators on recognizing those needs and how do we create an environment that's not just punitive, but what are we doing to help support our students? And that should come under that position as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I really appreciate those initiatives. Great job.
Thank you.
Can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
As it relates to the positions, the mental health and trauma specialists, and I know we have the opportunity to put further questions. I just want to ask really quickly, how do those positions differ from your behavior specialist positions? I know that the last time I checked, I don't think with behavior specialist positions, they had to have like a licensure or anything like that, but I just wanted to be clear, like how might these add to that, or how are they different?
I think, well, in my vision and what I see, the behavior specialists work on targeted behaviors, and these two roles can complement each other. But when we're talking about trauma, I'm thinking that and this is all being flushed out, so I by no means, and we're still working it out, these two people would work specifically on trauma initiatives. So, for example, what does that look like in a school? If we're saying we're going towards trauma-informed schools, well, every school should have a wellness room and know how to operate that. Every school should have a system in which they operate. How do they manage the traumas in their schools? So these people would be a part of the team, but really add value from a trauma perspective.
This would be an east side, west side.
East side, west side.
So we have one on each side of town to really help do some of the PL as well with our staff on recognizing trauma, which kind of goes in hand with some of the other that we just talked about with behaviors. But this isn't focused on, because behavior specialists are there to work with students who have identified behavior issues. But this is looking at, it can be depression, it can be anxiety, it can be, so this isn't about students who are necessarily acting out, and that acting out could be due to trauma, but this is about looking at, these kids who are coming back who've been abused, kids who've been neglected, kids who've been put in unfortunate situations since they've been out, and that's one of the big focuses of CARES and ARPA, is to be cognizant of the social, emotional, and mental health needs of students. So we're looking at this as more of a mental health professional, not an individual who's dealing with specific targeted behavior or misbehaviors, unfortunately.
Right, and I see it, and also Dr. Thomas and I talked about this as more of a prevention, and sometimes it may be intervening, but more of a prevention. We know that our students are coming back to school. We are well aware of what they've endured, even an adult. So what are we gonna do to make this entry, sustainable and best for them? Yes, ma'am?
Can I ask you a quick? Are these positions gonna be permanent? So once this funding runs out, do we then have to start going?
We right now see these positions, well, it could go both ways, but we kind of see it like an EIP position, right? Your goal is to work yourself out of a job. And so recognizing that these funds are given to us for a maximum of about 5-year period. So when we're hiring these positions, we're going to treat them like we do any grant funded position, being very open and upfront with individuals that these are not permanent. This could be a 3-year position or a 4-year position. Again, realizing that things happen, things change, other funds come up, and when you show that there's a value add, sometimes, oftentimes, there end up being other opportunities for you along the way. But this is why they're in the CARES funding and not general funds. But that's kind of been the purpose of why those funds have been designated at a federal level. So they are there to address a crisis. And so our hiring will be to that end. So, in some positions, you might hear other individuals speak about tonight, they may be able to earn themselves through added FTE that comes up as a result of those positions, and you'll probably hear that most from Mr. Gaskin's shop. But many of these positions are short-term crisis related, but not short-term like a year. We have through
24.
24, thank you, for these funds to be utilized. So it does provide a long range, but not a guaranteed permanent position.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, board. I just want to first start by thanking you for welcoming me back to Clark County School District. It was a great 5 years in my other school district, but I am just thrilled to be back home, and it is immensely gratifying to know that I'm coming to work every day and investing in my community. So, with that being said, I want to speak to you about strategic priority 4, human capital and development. And that priority really is centered around recruiting, developing, and retaining effective teachers, leaders, and staff who meet the diverse needs of our students. So in this strategic priority, we do have items that we are going to want to focus on that will both be general funded and funded through CARES and ARPA funds. So I want to talk first about the general fund pieces. And those are really related to salary related pieces for our current staff. One is to fully fund the TRS employer share increase, which is moving from 19.06% to 19.81%. So it's a fairly small increase, but it's an increase nonetheless that we need to absorb through the general fund. Secondly, we want to fully fund step increases for all eligible employees. So any employee that is eligible for a step increase would get that step increase. And then the third piece is to fund a salary increase for the remaining 19 employees that are outlined in the compensation study. So if you recall, or you may not recall, there was a comprehensive compensation study done back in 2016-17 that identified several job categories that were underpaid based on our current market situation. And over time, we have taken steps to address those. There are 19 employees left to be addressed, and so we would ask that the board would support us being able to fully fund their salaries increases to finish out that compensation study. So those are the pieces that would be funded through general fund. Through CARES and ARPA, we are looking at that continuity of core staff and services. And
And it's really, as Byron mentioned, a line to help us be able to retain staff. And the first piece of that is to offset the need to reduce staff due to our FTE decrease. I'm gonna show you some numbers in just a moment, but this would help us to maintain our FY '21 staffing levels into FY '22. And then secondly, we're proposing that because we did not see the governor add any salary increase to the state salary schedule, we normally would pass that along to our staff when that happens at the state level. That did not happen this year in the governor's budget, but because we know that our employees have experienced and continue to experience one of the most unique, challenging environments that we have ever been in, and they have not only endured, they have thrived, and they have been there for our students. So we would like to send a value message to them that we do value the contributions that they make and the work that they are doing with our students every day, and provide them two $1,000 payments in FY '22. One of those supplements will be paid in December, and then another one again in May. This is in addition and separate from the $1,000 bonus that they will receive next week that you just so voted on, and we would appreciate you doing that. So,
One second. Can you give a brief explanation on TRS and what that is and how we pay a percentage of that, and also step increases that people might not realize that sometimes those big drugs are without our salaries.
absolutely, great points, Dr. Thomas. So, to go back to number one, to fully fund the TRS employer share, every employee that is in the teacher's retirement system has a mandated 6% contribution of their paycheck every pay period to fund their retirement. That's what happens on the employee side, but on the employer side, for every single employee, we pay 19.06 this year and 19.81% next year of their salary every pay period to fund their retirement. So all in all, you know, roughly 25% right now of their pay, each pay period, is not directly coming out of their pay. It is being funded into their retirement plan. So 6% is coming from their pay, but then on top of that, we put in 19.06%. And next year that'll be 19.81. And as far as funding the step increases, so on our salary schedule, every employee has a grade or a level, a certification level, and related to that are steps that generally equate to their years of experience in some way, shape, or form. And so every year that they remain employed and are effective in their job, they earn that step increase. Sometimes when we are in certain financial times, we might freeze the step increases. And so what we're saying at this point is we want to make sure that we fully fund all the step increases for all employees that are due. Dr. Thomas, so going back to maintaining our FY '21 staffing levels, this just gives you some numbers behind the rationale for wanting to do that. We had, as you heard Byron say, a 4% decrease in our FTE. We do believe that the majority of that was likely due to the impact of COVID. And so we are hopeful that we will see that return to our school district over the coming years. But that is a total of 49.5 positions that we did not receive funding for in FY '22. And so that's why we are proposing that we take that $3.5 million from the CARES funding to offset that cost and be able to retain those staff. then the second initiative to provide two $1,000 payments. I just want to make sure that we're all very clear that this is going to have the greatest impact on our lowest paid employees. So they are going to see the biggest positive impact from these $1,000 payments. And so you have a chart there on the side that shows if an employee is making approximately $20,000 annually, this is the equivalent to a 10% raise. That's huge. And as you go up the salary scale, that percentage decreases. So there's still an impact, a positive impact. And I would maintain that all of our employees contribute to the success of our students and our school system. So you would be very justified in providing this to all employees. It also helps our employees feel rewarded for staying with us. And so it's another piece of our retention strategy. It doesn't add to the general fund because it is coming from the CARES ARPA funding. And it provides our employees with a compensation increase that they would not see otherwise this year.
I'm gonna make a comment, Dr. Thomas.
Yes, sir.
Just want to ask our chair that when we discuss this, excuse me, when we discuss this further in another meeting, if we could also bring to focus the compensation study that you sent me earlier today, because I think all board members, because the experienced board members have seen it already, but I'm not sure, I think we need a refresher, and I think new board members need to see it as well, in terms of looking at the pay scale of some of our employees. So that should be a part of the presentation next time. Thank you.
I would be happy to do that, and just to be fully transparent here, that occurred during my absence from the school district, and so I want to make sure that I have all of the information that might be needed by you all to have that to make your decision.
Good evening, board. I have strategic priority number 1, student achievement. Prepare every student for college and career success. So our first slide talks about what we will continue or add to our general fund. So as Selena mentioned, we will continue to fund and promote smaller class sizes. So as she mentioned, we were scheduled to lose almost 50 positions. With maintaining those positions, we will be able to maintain our lower class size. So you see the chart on the right shows the state max, and then you see the CCSD average class size at those grade levels in elementary school. We will also fund 2 additional assistant principal positions at the middle school level. So we have 4 middle schools. Right now, 2 of our middle schools have 2 assistant principals. With adding those additional assistant principals, all 4 middle schools will have 2 assistant principals. If you've had a middle school student, you know that middle schools are very complex places with complex students with complex needs, and we really feel that supporting our principal with an additional assistant principal will be helpful to them. Number 3 is a coordinator of secondary mathematics. We have a coordinator of mathematics that focuses on K-8, and our high school leaders focus on mathematics on their own. We really feel that there is a need for someone to support our 6-12 math teachers. Looking at our math data, looking at the opportunity to provide acceleration for our students, as well as have more students in AP classes, that our math focus is a priority of ours. And we think that a coordinator will be able to support those secondary math teachers. Number 4, we will continue to support ACT and pre-8, 9 ACT for all high school students. So the ACT is given in 11th grade, and this is free to all students. We also have an initiative where we will provide the pre-ACT to 8th graders and 9th graders so we can focus on test preparation sooner rather than later. I did make a note that the PSAT is available to 10th graders at no cost by the DOE. And then number 5, provide ongoing professional learning support for mathematic resource adoption. This school year we had 3 huge math adoptions at elementary school, at middle school, and at high school, and that was all done in a virtual environment. And so a face-to-face or blended environment is much different, so we want to be able to provide all of our math teachers with the continuous professional learning that they need. As we look at CARES Fund and ARPA funds, we have some initial ideas of supporting our schools with this funding. So number 1, provide 2 flexible instructional positions for schools to meet the learning loss and or social emotional student needs for 3 years. So we spoke to principals today. All schools are different. We're going to fund those flexible instructional positions at a counselor level. So a school may want to add a second counselor, or they may want to add a second or third instructional coach. They may want to use these flexible positions to add a teacher, maybe in 1st grade, because those kindergarten students have been at home for off and on for a year. So schools will have autonomy to do a root cause analysis about the needs of their school and use those 2 flexible instructional positions to meet those needs.
So for clarity, I'm sorry, so this is per school, this is not for the district, this is per school?
This is per school, so each school will get 2 additional flexible instructional positions. We are meeting tomorrow, I'm meeting with my team, and we will present to Dr. Thomas some guardrails or some guidance, I think guidance is a better word, around those positions to make sure that they are actually meeting the needs of the school. We are discouraging individuals to use these as administrator positions. We really want these individuals to either be serving students or supporting teachers as they serve students.
And Mr. Gaskins, this is also in addition to those, what we're calling hold harmless positions that we're not cutting, even though there was an FTE loss for 40-something positions that Mr. Schumann mentioned that we technically lost because of the 4% reduction in FTE, but we've chosen to use those funds to hold harmless and allow schools to maintain that staffing level. So they're maintaining that staffing level even though those positions were not earned, and then being given these in addition as flexible instructional positions to help with the loss, academic or social.
And so it is our desire that these individuals that are selected by our principals will be outstanding and they will work themselves out of a job because they're going to improve the social emotional needs and the academic needs of our students. It is for 3 years, as we mentioned, and it's an estimated investment of $10.1 million. Our second is summer school programs and supplemental learning opportunities to address learning loss. We are having summer school this summer, as you all are probably aware. We will continue to do that as long for the length of the grant with enhancing our current strategies around summer school. Number 3 is definitely something that is overdue for us as a district, is to create a CCSD virtual school. Dr. Thomas and I met today. We are trying to start small with secondary, meaning 6 through 12. In creating the virtual school, we will have a coordinator or virtual and extended learning, and then we will have a virtual or 2 virtual and extended learning facilitators. These are paraprofessional positions for our high schools. So in virtual learning, we do have some students that take all of their classes virtually and they're at home. We have some students, either due to remediation or for acceleration, that actually take their classes in the school, and they need someone to check in with, someone that can help them navigate the platform, someone that can help them contact their virtual teacher as needed. So we want to have a paraprofessional in the media center or in the classroom where those virtual students will have a space to take their classes. Our great interim chief of operations, Marsha Thomas, has encouraged us to hire paraprofessionals that want to be teachers. but are not yet certified. So we really believe that this will be a career ladder that will find, incredible individuals that love kids and then eventually can serve in a classroom. Number 4, digital software to support curriculum and supplemental resources. I have a member on my team that is doing an audit of all the digital software that we have. In that audit, she is looking for usage. So if we are using something, we will buy it again. And if we are not using something, we will not buy it because it is a waste of our money. So she is making sure that anything that is used at schools, we continue to buy. And we mentioned to principals today, if there's something that they need at the school to enhance their digital software collection, they need to let us know, and we will try to purchase that as well. Something that is very important is number 5, a coordinator of program evaluation. We are receiving a lot of money through CARES 1, 2, and ARPA, and we want to make sure that there is a positive academic impact with using this $64+ million. So this program evaluator will work with us to assess the initiatives that we are implementing. They will make recommendations for things that we want to continue, and I think that is to Dr. Anderson's question about things that would eventually move into our general fund. But they're also going to serve as a liaison with our community. Our community is aware of the funding, and they have exciting things that they want to do with our schools. But sometimes principals are very busy running schools and don't have an opportunity to field all of those questions or sit down with someone who wants to design something. So we are going to have this program evaluator that can work with principals, work with community members to make sure that anything that we implement in our schools has a positive academic and social emotional impact on our students. Number 6 is an MTSS implementation specialist. We will have 2 of those, one for the east side and one for the west side. MTSS is a framework that provides targeted support for struggling students in academics and behavior. So in an MTSS framework that works, students who are struggling with Tier 1 instruction, they go to Tier 2, they receive interventions, either academic interventions and behavior interventions. Those interventions work, and they go back to Tier 1, they catch up with their peers academically or demonstrate those same behaviors, and they are fine. In a framework that does not work, those students are staffed for special education and may or may not need it. So we're going to have 2 implementation specialists that can support the implementation specialist, who is usually an assistant principal or a counselor at the school level, to make sure that their framework is implemented with fidelity and that they have the proper training to ensure that we're not overrepresenting our students in special education services. Number 7 is compensatory services for students with disabilities. We've had a lot of interruptions in instruction, as you all know, and per students' IEPs, they are allotted in certain hours of instruction, and we will ensure through CARES funding that those students receive that instruction either through tutoring, after-school programming, summer programming, whatever is appropriate for them. And then number 8, which is very important to our principals as well as our teachers, is student device replacement. We did not collect devices at the end of last year. We allowed students to keep those over the summer, and we are anticipating that those will all, they may be in different forms when we receive them back. And so we just want to make sure that we use our funds to replace those student devices, so when we start school on August 4th, which seems right around the corner, all of our students will have working devices in their hands.
Questions for Mr. Jackson?
I have just one quick one. Are the compensatory programs for students with disabilities specifically for SPED students, special education students, or students in any other area?
So compensatory services is a special education term, so it is specifically for students with disabilities per their IEP. You're welcome.
I'm not sure this is your question, or maybe it was Dr. Blankenship's question. Once we put all of these together, what is our impact on the overall staffing?
So we would remain.
Increase or decrease or stay the same?
So it will increase with the recommended positions, but as far as to the budget, we will not be decreasing any teaching positions or paraprofessional positions. Selena, is that correct?
Yes, and overwhelmingly, the number of positions that we are proposing would be at the school level.
Yes.
And so I would like to see that breakdown.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now, just to touch on, when we met with the schools, we went into it with the mindset that we are not going to, that we're going to keep staffing levels the same. So at the school level exhibited, some schools lost more than 4%, and so we kept their staffing level consistent. Some schools actually gained positions. So if they gained and earned more positions, we funded those as well. So we just want to make sure that when you're asking, are we adding positions? Technically, yes, we are adding. If they lost FTE, we're keeping their positions funded at the same level.
In addition, some of those positions you won't be able to see yet, Ms. Davis, so we can show you now, but I think like a 3-month ramp out would be more accurate because, again, when you're talking about $64 million, that's why one of the first positions we have is someone to really help manage that. Because right now we have Ms. Hope McGuire doing that, and she's over all of our federal programs. And so we don't want to just go and start saying, you get a position, you get a position, and you get a position. We're starting with 2 to allow the schools to begin the year with additional positions to support that learning loss. But then the person that's going to do the evaluation and monitoring and managing of those funds is going to work with our principals to identify. So we kind of made an analogous to our LSGT funds. So principals are going to sit down, look at their data, look at their schools, see what their kids are coming back knowing and not knowing, and then bring a plan to us to say, this is what I need. So a large portion of those ARPA and CARES funds are yet to be designated. So it's not going to be completely accurate yet, because we want to make sure we have someone in place to work with our principals and help manage those funds, as well as work with our community groups, as Mr. Gaskin said. They will also be able to apply for funds, but we need someone who can oversee all of that, because all of us are slightly busy. And so when you bring in an additional $64 million, you want to have that done in a way where we're acting in a fiduciary way that's going to improve student learning, but that we can also monitor and assess it and be accountable for those funds. So some of that's going to be, again, 3 months out, so that principals can sit and tell us what it is they need, but we're starting with those 2 flex positions and then maintaining that staffing level.
Thank you, that helps.
Right. So you won't see it all right now. We can give, say today, and it may look top heavy. I want to be transparent because you have to have someone to manage some of those funds. But if you looked at it from all the other positions, like MTSS is something that's required for us to have at schools.
Right.
So some of these things are things that are already in place, but we just want to be sure, and they're going to be, they're district, but they're actually working with schools. So they're not sitting here, they're out in the buildings with our schools. But we just want to be sure, I want to be sure that people listening understand that that money is going to schools and community, but we need to get the structures in place to determine how to disseminate that.
I absolutely support that, so thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
All right, good evening, everyone. Lawrence Harris. I am covering strategic priority 2, community collaboration. Our overarching goal is to engage family, community members, and civic organizations as active partners. So again, similar to my colleagues, I'll talk about how we have prioritized our general fund dollars as well as our CARES and ARPA funds. So when we look at our general fund, the first thing is we're going to continue to fund our LSGT mini grants. As you all know, we have been funding our Better Everyday grants to the school level for the past 3 years. This year, we're excited that we actually have dropped that account down to our last few $1,000s. So every school has applied for grants and received funds to meet the needs of their students. As you all know, our LSGTs, the whole purpose is to drive student achievement. So we're really proud of our LSGTs and the work they've done this year. As you can imagine, being an LSGT member during a pandemic definitely comes with some challenges as you try to see what are the best ways to serve the needs of your students in that building. So we will continue to fund those grants for our LSGTs. Once we get our FTE numbers in, we'll look at each school and provide that allotment. Speaking of LSGTs, our number 2 is actually to bring on a governance and flexibility coordinator. As many of you all are aware of the board, we have our charter system contract with the State Board of Education. We are a charter system. One of the things that we noticed in my office, though, is the need to increase the capacity of us as a charter system. Though we have our LSGTs, that's just one of several of the items that are listed in our contract that we would do as a charter system. Our flexibility just doesn't sit at the school level of LSGTs. It actually integrates through all the departments who have spoken here tonight, as well as many who aren't here tonight. And so we need someone who can be laser focused on that work full time, really helping us to maximize our flexibility, helping us to think about what are some of the innovative practices we could bring to the Clark County School District to help improve student achievement. So as a charter systems, we really only have hit the tip of the iceberg on the many things we could be doing to continue to make our schools the best they can be. So looking to bring on a governance and flexibility coordinator to help lead that work, to help support our schools in their flexibility and their governance practices. As you all know, we actually brought on our Director of Public Relations and Communications, Dr. Donald Porter, who's here tonight. So that position was vacant and is now filled. That was funded through the general fund. Not much more to say there, but happy to have him on the team. Number 4 is our professional development training program. So that sits within my department. Those are funds that we use to make sure all of our leaders are trained in the same framework. So I believe the board actually participated in some of that training last year, the year before, smart systems, Trago Ed, decision analysis. I'm seeing some head nods, so you all remember the training. So those funds are in my budget, and we use that to train all of our school and district leaders. So we're all speaking the same common language and using the same framework as we try to determine what's the best needs of our schools in our district. So we will continue to fund that. It's important that we continue to learn. We are a learning community, and so we want to make sure we have the funds available to do that. The last thing is we are looking at expanding our language services. As you all know, we currently use Language Line. We have our one district translator, Mr. Alex Borges. And so as we look at our need for language services, as our Spanish-speaking population increases in Athens-Clarke County, we also have other students coming in international from other countries, speaking different languages. We want to make sure that we have the tools that those families need to engage with their schools properly and readily. So we don't want schools having to search to find someone who can speak the language. We don't want a family feeling like, I can't engage with my school because I don't understand what's going on. And so we're looking at expanding our language services, potentially through Language Line, but also exploring other digital tools that have become very popular in modern times. So we're going to look to expand those services through our general fund. So I think that's a really great thing. Hopefully, we want our families to feel that they are participating. I'm excited, back to number 1 really quickly, we do have several Spanish-speaking members now in our LSGTs. That was one of our team's goals this year, is to make sure that all of our families felt like they could serve and they could have voice at the table. And now we have 3 of our LSGTs. We provide translators at those meetings. And it's just really exciting just to see all of our families feel like they can engage regardless of what language you speak. So we just want to make sure we keep that at the forefront of our mind. Only have one for CARES and ARPA currently. The funds still have some years to be used, so I may be back in a couple of months, so look out for that. But that one position is our Community Schools Director. Many of you all are familiar with the Community Schools Framework, but it's really, became popular about a century ago, and it's kind of gained resurgence because it is really a way to address residential segregation and economic inequalities that you see in communities. And so we're looking to fund the Community Schools Director through the school district to help integrate our social services, our nutrition services, our mental health framework, our expanded learning through our after-school programs, having that person who can develop that strategy and help to launch it here in Athens-Clarke County. So you all know we have very active and engaged nonprofits, civics organizations, businesses, many different initiatives. And so this individual will be responsible to first conduct a needs assessment of each of our schools to identify what are the community resources that can be leveraged for each school and each individual need, whether it's through a nonprofit, civic partner, business partner, to ensure that those needs of those students are met. I believe Mr. Davis has mentioned sometimes in meetings around how community schools are about expanded learning. So how do we kind of, not say tear down physically, but remove some of the walls of our schools to provide opportunities for adult learning and for opportunities for families to come in and take classes and take courses with students and with community members. And so we're looking to bring on a director whose work for the first couple of months will really be just about the needs assessment. That takes time to do a needs assessment for a district our size, and then eventually we would launch into each school having their own plan and their own framework to truly have a 21 school district community schools model. So those are the 3 goals at the bottom. Won't read those out loud because they're kind of small. And I guess I won't ask for questions because we said we will save those for later, unless you have some.
I keep going back to, and ironically, we were already doing the work of looking at community schools. That's what the basis of our charter was. But ironically, when you look at the CARES and ARPA recommendations from the feds, they are really advocating for the community schools model as a way of helping to close this achievement gap and address some of the disparities that have existed, but also just some of the needs that have come to communities and students as a result of the pandemic. So we were excited to see that that language was included in the ARPA and CARES funding because it aligned perfectly with our charters.
My one little, comment would be, when we look at the expansion of language services, could we, make sure that we're looking not just at spoken languages, but also our families that use American Sign Language or different forms of communication. But other than that, I'm excited, thank you.
Morning, Ms. Hall, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I know where my heels. Marsha Thomas, I'm glad to be back as well. I'm going to discuss strategic priority number 5, financial and operational effectiveness. Manage and protect public funds and assets through efficient and effective use of available resources. Under this particular priority, you will see the general funds here, and this is what we are currently using those particular funds for. You will see that when we're looking at our custodial services, we're going to continue to fund one custodian for every 17,500 square feet, which is kind of a formula that we're using as a result of our compensation study. So we're going to do that, and then additional utility and overhead for new district offices off of Prince. So once we relocate to the Prince Avenue establishment, that because of the square footage, that particular building will require 4 additional custodians. We also need 2 additional maintenance personnel. Our maintenance, my whole shop works really well, but we have limited individuals in plant services, and as a result of that, it is almost like they are trying to juggle to be in 2 places at once. So 2 additional maintenance personnel is also needed. We've not had a safety coordinator for almost a year, and 2 more of our departments have kind of absorbed those particular duties and responsibilities that come along with that particular area. Everybody's pretty overworked during the pandemic. I think it's pretty consistent, but we also will need a safety coordinator to make sure that our first priority is to keep our students safe. So we need a safety coordinator. And we also, with the general funds, we will be purchasing 4 new buses. And we hope we can get enough drivers to fill those 4 new buses, because as you know, there's a shortage in that area as well. When we look at our CARES Act and ARPA, these are some things that we hope that you will approve: the distance and remote learning, which includes the purchase of additional hotspots for our students. We didn't have nearly as many as we would like to have had this particular time, which caused some problems with some of our families, and therefore we did seek out to see what type internet services we're willing to offer discounts to our families for an X amount of time. So we are going to purchase some hotspots for our students. And we look at our facilities and equipment. Later on, John Gilbert will talk about our HVAC systems, which we are asking for your approval, but the air quality systems as well. I think you all, prior to my coming here, were given a demonstration of how those air filtering systems work in classrooms so that we can keep our students safe. And of course, the PPE supplies, we look at the masks, we look at the goggles, we look at hand sanitizers and chemicals to continue to sterilize our facilities to ensure the safety and to limit the transmittal of COVID. And in addition to that, laptops for our paraprofessionals. We work very hard to make sure that our paraprofessionals embed themselves in the work with our students. And what we have come to realize is we ask them to collect data, and it would be much easier to be able to do this if they, okay. Yeah, I'm sleepy. If, it would be much easier if they had technology that will assist them in collecting the data for the students, and they're also able to see the digital programs that our students are participating and engaged in. So we are asking your assistance on that. Oh yes, not only paraprofessionals, but our academic interventionists as well, who also serve in a similar capacity. And thank you. School meals, we've asked about the purchase of a food truck to ensure that our food, the truck is very old that we have, but we want to ensure that our truck, the food stays fresh as we're trying to make the delivery to students. That would be very instrumental as we probably continue with our mobile curbside service so that an item is really needed. Offset the food costs. These particular funds will also offset the food costs that's not reimbursed through the state, because the nutrition department has really gone out of their way, because even in addition to some of the Wednesday curbside service, for instance, yesterday, Wednesday, as we know, we're approaching time off. Instead of just giving students meals for just that Wednesday, they will pack up a meal for Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, 2 meals for each of those days. So we don't want our students to be hungry. We really want to make sure that we feed as many students as possible, as often as possible. And then lastly, the CARES and ARPA has funded a lot of the diesel that we're using in our buses for the extra routes that we're running to ensure that the mobile food delivery is able to take place. So are there any questions about financial and operational effectiveness in district services? All right.
I don't have a question, but I would just make a comment. Our nutrition staff has been amazing, as well as the nutrition. When I looked at different districts and I can see what they're delivering, a lot of processed stuff, a lot of junk. I was so happy when I see, I see the fresh fruits, vegetables, and the healthiness with the balance of junk food like they like, but the quality of the food that our children are getting is amazing.
It really is, and I try to compliment them as much as possible. And unfortunately, for our nutrition department, I'm just going to throw this in here since I'm said about the superintendent. Unfortunately for our nutrition department, Ms. Paula Farmer has lost many employees as a result of the pandemic. I think it's almost 15 employees as a result of the pandemic. And so we are trying to readjust our efforts as we speak to make sure that when all students return after spring break, that we can run those cafeterias as effective and efficiently as possible. She's sending extra help to Central and Cedar because of the loss that we have in employees. So I know that the money that we set aside for the bus drivers, the nutrition, and custodians, I know that they will be very appreciative to know, you can say it all day, but they'll be very appreciative to know that there's some financial stipend to say that we appreciate the work that they do. Thank you very much.
And can I just say with Dr. M. Thomas's, the information that she shared, I think that also, highlights the importance of us being back in school. Because a lot of parents, if something happens and they can't go to school or their children can't go to school, that means they can't go to work. And then they are impacted significantly funding. And so I think we are seeing some of that as well. You know, people don't, not everyone has access, you know, to be able to hire, you know, private teachers and things like that. So I am happy that we are, you know, taking steps to be able to address financially, you know, those circumstances, but then also just being able to provide additional support, and hopefully in the years to come, we can continue to really prioritize, you know, our colleagues so that they can have livable, you know, wages, and because all of that rolls back and impacts, you know, as we see it, impacts the school district.
Okay, so I'll back clean up here. So the last section of our strategic plan, not only is operations part of strategic priority 5, but also business services. I would like to draw your attention just to the 2 goals that I own in business services. 5.1 down at the bottom, build and maintain an adequate cash reserve to cover either unanticipated deficiencies in revenue loss, or unanticipated expenditures. So we want to make sure that we have an adequate safety net. And I've spoken to our finance committee about that, and I harp on it pretty much every time we look at our monthly financials. 5.2 is improve the effectiveness of fiscal operations and resource allocations. 5.1 would have otherwise dropped off in our newest rendition of the strategic plan, because whenever we met with our strategic plan advisors, we said, why is that on there? You know, why if you guys already have an adequate cash reserve, why is that still a strategic priority? And to me, we're making a recommendation to improve effectiveness in 5.2, as you see under general fund, the first bullet point there, shifting the payroll calendar for 10-month staff. That is really going to improve our effectiveness of fiscal operations and resource allocations, but it's going to have a direct negative impact on that cash reserve. So I will just go ahead and skip up to the next slide. What we're making the recommendation of doing is collapsing the 10-month employee payroll calendar. If you look up at the screen, it is the one that's up on top in yellow. So right now, teachers and other 10-month staff, which make up 94% of our entire population, our entire employee population, are paid September through the following August. So even though we're asking teachers to come back to work earlier and earlier and start in July, they're not getting compensated for that work until middle of September. You know, September 15th, they're getting their first paycheck for that fiscal year. And really, there's no other industry that I know of that has such a misalignment of pay with the timing of work performed. And so around the state, it's been a very strong push for districts to collapse that 10-month calendar a month forward and basically just end up with two payroll calendars. So one, you've got 12-month staff down there at the bottom, and the other one is all your other 10 and 11-month staff. I can tell you that Walton County, they're doing that this year. Barrow County, our neighbors, they're doing it this year. Jackson County did it a couple of years ago, and it's really something that we've wanted to do for several years. We just haven't had the cushion to do so. And so now is really the best time for us to really push this initiative forward, even though it's going to decrease our cash on hand. It will positively impact our effectiveness as an organization.
Byron, may I just add one point to that, having lived through that transition? It also has a very positive impact on the staff. And particularly, it helps when you are recruiting and hiring staff, because when you do start paying in September, many times what happens is you have to divide their pay over 13 months rather than 12. So that paycheck that they thought they were going to get is suddenly less. And it really kind of deflates their excitement about being in your district. So if we can provide that alignment, it'll also help on that side of things too.
That's true. So I've got a few bullet points just kind of highlighting the benefits of shifting this calendar forward. The first one, 94% of our staff will receive doubled pay in July. So that means instead of receiving 2 paychecks, they're gonna receive 4. And so talk about, you know, a good, significant, immediate impact on employees and employee morale. This will be huge. And like Selena had just mentioned, each year we've got over 200 new employees, and in order to kind of bridge that gap, we spread their pay over 13 months, which marginally decreases their pay throughout the year. And so if we back this up, they're gonna be right away paid on a consistent schedule from then going forward. So I don't know if I phrased that very clearly, but when we hire new employees, new teachers coming to our district, instead of taking their overall salary that they earn and spreading it over 12 months, we have to do it over 13 months. So it decreases the amount that they take home every month. So this change will make it over 12 months instead of 13. There you go, it's like getting a raise also, yeah. And although this shift is not technically an expense, it's just a matter of cash flow. Our cash flow is going to decrease by roughly $10 million from one month to the next. In terms of an expense, it's actually going to save our district. So money's going to go out the door faster, but we're only paying for 12 months of health insurance. You know, just as an example, we pay $940 per month per insured employee. We would have to do that one last month for 200 employees. So there's actually a cost savings by doing this. So I did talk about 5.1, goal number 1, business services. We want to build and maintain that safety net. It's defined as 15% of your next year's budgeted expenditures. The orange line here represents this fiscal year, at fiscal year 21, and I know we're not done yet, but we can pretty well estimate at this point where we're going to end up at the end of the year. And as you can see, that roller coaster curve, it stayed above that blue line the entire year. And really that blue line, that 15%, it's enough to keep the district going for between 2 and 3 months at a time. So that's really what we've drawn as a line. We want to keep above that. If we make this shift, you can see here what our fund balance projection is going to be in FY22. And so now we do have room to increase, and that's why it's part of the strategic plan. That's why it's still a bullet point and goal 5.1 is, although we're going to end up at the same place, we really need to make a concerted effort to add a little bit to our fund balance to stay above that 50% threshold for the entire year. The second initiative that I have using general funds, I would really like to add another business services coordinator. Together with our budget coordinator, they would forge in a team. And one of the initiatives that we have as a district, and I think Mr. Davis, you had asked the question about, although we've got an average of low class sizes, how do we ensure that staffing at the school levels is equitable across the board? One thing that we're doing as a district, and it might take 2 years, is implementing a ramp. And a ramp is a resource allocation method or plan. And based off of numbers, very analytically, based off of FTE counts and student needs, you have a direct correlation to how many positions you earn. And so what I'm looking at doing is adding this business services coordinator to forge that team to go and assist principals, assist scheduling personnel at the schools so that they can schedule students and build their schedule so that it maximizes their FTE and in return maximizes the funding for the district and in turn maximizes the personnel that's earned at the school. So this ramp is a way to analytically calculate how much or how many positions are earned at a school 6 months in advance of the next school year. So we'll be able to do that in November going forward for the next fiscal year. So we'll be able to do that in advance, and that's part of this team's responsibility is building that, monitoring it, and training our principals and scheduling coordinators on how to maximize your earnings. So in summary, we're kind of right back where we started. I know we had covered a lot. You know, we've got a lot of initiatives that are either to be paid for and covered with general fund money, or the additional funding sources on top that are used to supplement and add on to your general fund. What you're looking at here is just our general fund resources. And if I could leave you with a one-pager of our initiatives. Start off, you know, we're gonna continue to emphasize low class sizes. We're gonna keep our staffing consistent despite our decline of 4%. We're funding all those step increases for eligible employees. It's gonna be a cost of about $2.7 million. We're looking at providing 2 additional $1,000 supplements paid in December and May, and better aligning those payroll calendars, providing 94% of our employees double pay in July. And finally, funding the compensation study, which has been a several-year effort to finally complete, you know, lifting up those wages for those 19 remaining employees. We do have a question and answer sheet. I shared that with you. It's also linked in the slides. Any questions that you have, whether it be revenues, other resources, one of our priorities that were covered, if you would go in and fill that out in the worksheet, we'll meet together and we'll make sure to get a correct and adequate response to you. We'll also take recommendations. If we had some blind spots and we didn't, and you guys have some suggestions for us to look at and how we weave into either our general fund or our additional funds, we'd love to hear it in there as well. So if we can just wrap up with this slide here, this is the steps forward to having an approved initial budget by the start of next fiscal year. We are right there in the middle of the screen, so April 1st, we're having this presentation to our work session. April 13th, we're going to deliver all of the documents that completely support this budget, you know, all the dollars and cents, the added positions, and we'll be able to drill down and see exactly what funds and what functions and object codes, all of that detail. If you want it, it'll be there. You'll have that in a week in advance, and we will need to hold one more called session, whether we call it a work session or call a meeting. It's really to dig into the budget and do that budget training with y'all. After that, if we can leave April 20th meeting with a really good feeling that, hey, we're really going in the right direction, this is a good budget. If we, by May, can just say, hey, here's a one-pager, here is our estimated revenues, here's our estimated expenditures. Really simple document. You guys know what our initiatives and priorities are. You know what's in that budget. If we can approve that, that'll really set us up comfortably to have enough time to get this approved by the end of July, at the end of June. After that initial approval in May, those next 2 weeks between May 13th and 21st, we're going to have 2 public meetings. We're going to have to advertise the budget in the newspaper, disseminate it to all our stakeholders. And we have to do that with enough time that they give feedback before the final approval, hopefully on June 10th.
I've been real quiet. I think I've been very good. But I do want to make just a general thing. And I think we've done a lot with this budget in terms of helping our employees. I do look at the 21% fund balance. And I think I missed what Dr. Gant said the first half. I just call it coming in. But I am concerned that we have folks who are making below $15 an hour. And as a member of Economic Justice Coalition, that's one of our missions is to pay. And here I am on the school board, and we have people in Clark County who are making less than $15 an hour. So I just throw that out there. I know we have to budget based on what we can pay year after year after year after year, and I get that. But I look at the compensation study, and, it doesn't look good for all employees. We're doing a lot here, but I don't know if, at the end of the day, if we're going to bring everybody up to $15 an hour. Thank you.
So my comment is I thoroughly enjoyed this presentation. It's the first budget presentation I've actually understood very well. It was very well explained, and I can see the vision for where monies are being sent and proposed to go. And so I really appreciate this format. Y'all did an excellent job. I don't know how you presented the budget before, but please don't go back to that. Keep it in this format.
Appreciate you back.
So I have one quick question, and that's about I know people don't like those banners. Some people do not like the banners, but there are members of the public that typically will request a banner in case you're not aware of that, because this is your first year going through this. So we may need to just know to be prepared if there might be those.
I'll talk to you about that. My plan is to have a two-page PDF that looks very similar to your monthly financials that you see, that's gonna have the budget in it. The second one, the first page is gonna look almost identical to your revenues and expenditures that you see on a monthly basis. The second page is gonna be your expenditures broken out by cost center as well as function. And in that, I'm gonna say, here's a two-page document. And each one of the dollar amounts, you'll be able to click on and see the full detail behind it. So I don't know what.
Well, we have one community member who literally takes the banner, takes it apart, spreads it out on her table, and spends time with it. So, yeah, I'm just warning.
Okay, good, 'cause we have said, hey, we want to deliver this electronically. If somebody wants a paper copy of this, please let me know and we'll make copies.
Thank you.
Okay, so my kind of lines for the public meetings. I know students are, and we've seen at school board meetings where students are very informed and want to be engaged in the process. Do we have a process where students outside of that can engage in the process?
I haven't engaged down to the student level yet. That's something definitely entertaining. I haven't embarrassed to say I haven't even thought about it, but that's a great suggestion. And I'll work with Dr. Thomas, the rest of the team to develop a way that we can receive the feedback.
And I'd also like to add to that, as a part of like student services and community engagement, we've been kind of talking about how can we lift the student voice and what are some ideas around that. There are some students that are very outspoken in CCSD, and how can we kind of bring their voices to the table. So that is a discussion, out there, we can kind of talk about that. That's a big sticky on my wall.
And we're actually beginning a student superintendent advisory committee that we plan to roll out next year. And Mr. Harris, I'm sure you know, COVID fall. Mr. Harris has been working, we looked at the state. I watched how the state superintendent has a student advisory board. And so on top of the other 83,000 things I asked him to do, I gave him the charge of developing one for Clark County, and he has worked really hard on that. He's been working on a leadership training module for those students, working on how we will bring them in, how many, are we doing 8th through 12th grade, how do we stagger the terms so we're not starting over every year. But he's already put a lot of work into that, and that doesn't fix it for this year. We can still find a way to do it, but that will be one of the things that we're excited to have a body already in place moving forward to be able to help and give input on a variety of things, including the budget. So we're excited to roll that out next school year, and he has put a lot of time into researching that and helping to develop that model for us in the school district.
If I may just add to that for future, definitely including our students and then like all of our, school-based stakeholders, being sure that teachers and paras and our custodial staff and nutrition staff, I know from what I've heard you say, like, the leaders in those departments have met with their staff. And so ideally, this is a reflection of those conversations. But also, I would like for us to think through in the future, like, how do we include students? And then how do we include those positions and people often that, have the least amount of power in institutions. And so I don't think that's a tomorrow fix, but as we look at it, I'm sure it would fall in a few different places with our strategic plan, but looking at how do we incorporate that at some point in this particular calendar? So.
I'll just stay up here.
But thank you all very much. This was really awesome. Like just going, like really the calendar. I know we've been trying to get to a calendar for, I think since we've been on the board. And we, like 1 year we outlined it and then, so this is like the year that it actually happens. And I think I heard you say, Mr. Schumann, that ideally, of course, this starts in October, but I do want to, I think I speak for the board and saying thank you all very much, Dr. Thomas and Mr. Schumann and Cabinet for really being intentional about having these conversations early. And sharing this information with us in a way that we can digest it and also provide feedback.
That brings us to our next agenda item. It's the financials for February. Our cash and fund balance, we're still tracking well ahead of where we were at the prior fiscal year, about $5.9 million. Just a reminder, we ended last fiscal year up $4.5 million, and we've had continued savings throughout this year, which is why we're at an additional $5.9 million at this point in the fiscal year. And when I had talked about one of our initiatives of backing up the calendar for those 10-month staff, we would not be able to do it without the addition of fund balance for the last 5 or 6 years. We've had healthy fund balance additions year after year, and it's really set us up into a place where we can do that. Like I said, it is a great time to do it. We've got the resources to do it, and now is the time to do it, in my opinion. Revenues, local property taxes, we're about a percentage point roughly behind where we were last year. I still don't think this is a huge area of concern. We will end up at least $1.5 million to $2 million in added fund balance this year. We may not hit that 100% benchmark that we're looking at collecting what's budgeted. So that's why I have this in red. It's the one item on our financials that's in red. We're just going to continue to keep an eye on it and just to know we may not reach 100%, but it will be close. QBE, it's also in green. I shared last month that we're receiving $3.6 million for the second half of the 21 school year, and that's due to the state's amended fiscal year 2020 budget, and those funds have started rolling in. In terms of total revenues, we are ahead of where we were the prior year at this point, 77.9 versus 76.3. So overall, revenues are looking pretty solid right now. Expenditures, overall, we're on track to spend less than our FY21 budget, which is primarily what our control is, our authorized level of spending. We're definitely on track to spend less. In terms of percentage and how we stack up to FY20, we're at 53.4% of our budget compared to 54.3% for the prior fiscal year. Just a note, and I fully suspect that these numbers will flip-flop, and now that we're back face-to-face, I do anticipate that expenditure levels will ramp back up and surpass where we were at the previous fiscal year, just due to the timing of the pandemic and when we went virtual and when we went back face-to-face. Overall, though, cash flow projection-wise, we're looking at with the changes, with the additional revenues, with the expenditures, I've tracked it out and estimated the remaining months that we have. Lisa, if you will scroll down to the last document there, just so we can see it visually. There's the addition. So that bottom graph, I don't know if you can zoom in just a little bit, we had estimated to decrease our cash on hand, our bank account, by almost $5.5 million. It was trending up on so the orange line is the actual either addition or deletion estimation to our bank account at the end of the year. We were trending up, and we got the news of the additional $3.6 million, and that took us to a positive place as opposed to decreasing money in our account. Now we're adding funds again, and I think last month I had projected about 1.7, and we've had a little bit more modest growth, so right now about 1.8. So I feel comfortable saying anywhere between 1.5 and $2 million we're going to add to our fund balance at the end of this year. And does anybody have any questions before we wrap up with our financials for February?
Thank you, Mr. Schiff. And an amazing job. He's made budgets for them, for me, not for you all. But I can understand it, it's amazing, so.
It is, thank you.
All right, thank you. So that concludes your report, Dr. Thomas and Mr. Schuman.
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
Okay. So we will move forward to section 9, and these are our policies, regulations, and exhibits to be posted for 4 weeks for public comment. Dr. Yeager?
Thank you, Dr. Gann. So we have a total of 17. The 9.1 is regulation JKR2, and it goes together with JKR3, which is 9.2. Both of these are designed to make consistent with policies activities that teachers have already been doing, and it has to do with redefining solicitations from a position of just raising money to actually working with these new crowdfunding types of things that are more stuff-oriented or supply-oriented. And so the crowdfunding is no longer just cash, raising cash, but actually now raising supplies. And this is actually a preferable way for teachers to raise necessary funds for their classroom is through supplies, so no cash ever changes hands. So JKR2, if you look at JK, the actual policy, which we're not changing, it talks about solicitations and the rules around solicitations and fundraising. We are now changing the crowdfunding definition to include raising resources instead of just cash. So all that's going on here is just making what's already being done consistent with policy. It is it's meant to encourage teachers to do this work. It's not meant to be punitive in any way or restricting in any way. This is something that the district is very pleased about, that teachers are going out and, to be honest, I'm like, why do the teachers have to do this? But if they are doing this, at least they can do it the way that is best for the students and best for them, and no cash has to change hands. It's all supplies. And I guess I would defer if Mr. Harris wants to come in any further. This rewrite came from him and Mr. Gaskins. I would just ask if he wanted to say anything else about it. He's good. Okay, thank you. Since I can't see him, I can only see what's on the YouTube. I appreciate that. Are there any questions or concerns? I know I heard from a couple of you about what this is all about. I hope I addressed those concerns as they came to me, but I'm willing to listen to any other concerns.
I apologize for not getting my concerns to you because I was really late reading this, but I am curious as to how much of this are we doing and how does it fit in with their already busy days?
can answer that, Ms. Davis. So currently, we actually have looked at our crowdfunding with Go Donors Choose. In the past 4 years, we've had over $240,000 worth of resources raised by teachers for supplies in their classrooms. For supplies in their classrooms. Cedar Hills High School, Alps Elementary, Gaines, Chase Street Elementary, so the schools that use it more than others. This policy will allow us to establish a district partnership with Donors Choose, which means that the approval process can go through the principal and the superintendent instead of individual teachers posting without anyone knowing if there are items coming in. So to Dr. Yeager's point, right now this policy only allows teachers to raise dollars. It doesn't cover resources and supplies like calculators, pencils, any other items they may be raising. So this policy is now an expanded version of that, which will allow them to raise funds and get supplies donated to their classrooms.
So this is, and I'm asking this question because I hear this often, yet I don't ever see where anybody's refused to purchase things, or I don't know where we have these deficits in these classrooms that teachers need to raise supplies to buy calculators. I don't understand that. And so I guess that's what's behind this, and I know that this policy isn't gonna change that, but I'm curious as to, I actually really wanna know, do we have such a deficit that we have to have teachers do crowdfunding to get the supplies they need to educate our children?
Can I answer that?
Not with the fund balance like we were carrying, I don't understand that, and so that's where I want us to be.
I can tell you it's being used.
I appreciate that, and so who polices that, and is that something that we care about? I'm curious.
Well, that's our.
I know we're putting a policy out here, but.
Well, that's why we're doing the district partnership with Donors Choose. So this actually came out of meeting with one of the representatives and realizing that we have teachers using the website to raise funds for supplies and resources. And so once we met with the rep, we realized that it would be important to put this in place because we don't know when tools and supplies are being funded. Because the way Donors Choose works, they can set up a page saying, you know what, I want to fund 50 calculators. I'm using calculators. There's definitely much more complex supplies than calculators. But calculators in my classroom. And then donors from around the world can donate money to Donors Choose and to that classroom, and the calculator is shipped directly to that school, to that teacher. But because we haven't necessarily have a policy in place that allows us to go through like a permissions process, it kind of happens without there being any type of approval or oversight. We just want to make sure we know what's entering and leaving the building, so principals as well as Dr. Thomas know what it is that our teachers and our staff are asking for. What are some of the, as you mentioned, deficits and supplies. So this will actually provide a little bit more oversight, but also allows our teachers to actually post to do it in alignment with the policy, which right now we don't actually cover them being able to do the policy.
Another thing that might add to that is when they're doing special projects,
Yes.
and they don't have the supplies, it could be the display boards, which are kind of costly, so it could be supplies for different projects that they may be doing in the classroom that's around something that they've already had a discussion about. And parents, not all parents have the resources to buy those supplies, so teachers will want to do a donor choose, so everything that that student needs is there to help them have a great display.
For example, one of our schools, we're building an aquaponics system, so that requires a lot of piping, water, tubs. So rather than the children bringing in those supplies, the teacher posted all of the materials they needed for that, and it was funded through Donors Choose. So people purchased the items that were then shipped to the school for those projects. Now, yes, it could probably also go to school allotments if they have the money, but this is just another avenue for teachers to do projects to get supplies they need.
I'm gonna think about that one for a minute. Thank you so much, I appreciate that.
Yeah, and just sort of going off of what Linda was saying, is there an avenue right now for teachers to ask for these things from the district?
Yeah, I believe, I may have to lean on my college, but yeah, they're principals, they can go to their building leaders. They can also go to their principals and ask for supplies and material if it's in the school budget. I can't say it will be funded, but I'm pretty sure if the principal has the allotment and the money to do so, they'll fund it. When I look at the list of things that have been funded, maybe it was for projects, school gardens, special projects, different materials and supplies for the classroom, but I'll lean on Brandon, he'll talk more about how teachers get supplies.
Thank you.
So I think the context of Donors Choose is more like a wish list. So when teachers go to donors choose, there is no guarantee that those things will be funded. So teachers, myself included, we like to beg, borrow, and steal anything we can to enhance our classroom. Like we ask for paper at the beginning of the year, we ask for rulers, we ask for sanitizer, just things to enhance our classrooms. And so donors choose, they just put things on there, and sometimes they get funded and sometimes they do not. But in the absence of those things being funded, we fund everything for the schools. I sign, I think, requisitions every single day for materials, for science kits, for math manipulatives, for really anything that schools need. I've never had a situation where a principal has asked or a teacher has asked, because teachers do reach out to me personally and say, hey, this is something I need for my classroom. For example, Dr. Thomas and I have funded our newspapers at the Odyssey and I can't remember Blueprints, thank you, I knew it was going. Because the teacher reached out directly to us. So I think when we think about Donors Choose, it is a wish list. Donors Choose has philanthropists that encourage teachers to apply, but it's not based on, in our situation, there's not a deficit of materials. Teachers, myself included, we just like to have extra stuff if we can to use our money or use the school money in other ways.
And I'll say, I stepped out, but that's one of the reasons sometimes that I think the district has been resistant to or hesitant about utilizing crowdfunding sites, because sometimes teachers put descriptions about the community, the school, poverty. Sometimes the schools are presented in a negative light in terms of ability to support the needs of the school. And that's why when I get requests, even now, I'm not very quick to jump on funding or approving those, because all fundraisers come through me. And so some things are basic needs, and as a school system, we supply those needs, and we don't want to ever get the perception that we refuse to or aren't able to support the academic needs of our students. And I think it was Mr. Harris or Mr. Gaskins that said, sometimes they are like extra projects you're doing, and you want to do this big gardening thing, and it might, that can be pricey to get how many shovels and mulch and pebbles and stones, and I mean, those things are above what a traditional classroom might need when teachers want to do unique projects. And those, to me, are areas. We have someone who's trying to do a big leadership training for student council and wants to take the kids somewhere out of state that's, they're looking at $40,000 or $50,000. That's different. So to me, it should be things that are above and beyond your typical needs in a classroom, not paper and pencils. And so those things that come in, I am generally not apt to approve, because we are able to and should support families that aren't able to do that in our schools. But if you want to, build a walking trail, let's say, and you want things that are needed to do that, and that's, to me, above your traditional material needs. Mr. Davis?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, even before there was such thing as crowdsourcing in the internet, as a teacher and a counselor, I always, talk to the community. And that's part of having a community school, we're not self-contained. We are part of a larger community. And folks want to support their schools. And so, to me, this is a very positive thing. Now, obviously, what Dr. Thomas says in terms of how they're advertised, we don't want to go hat in hand, but I published a whole newspaper because of the weekly paper financing the publication of it. It was great. So,
That answers my questions about the potential uses of it, and so again, I know that we did address this since I've been on the board, and I think it was pretty much vetoed because of the lack of control, so it looks like we have a source now that does a better
addition, oh, go ahead, Dr. Yeager. Well, let me just double check, if you can hold on a minute, are there any other questions or concerns about that particular policy? Okay, Dr. Yeager, the floor is yours.
Okay, so I couldn't hear some of that conversation. I couldn't hear Linda very well. So maybe Linda, could you write down your concerns and so I could hear them again? But it sounds like most people are on board with these two. Can we have a motion to move them up?
So moved.
I don't think we need a motion
Oh, okay.
right now. I think we're just going through them, and next week, we'll take action on them to be posted.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I apologize. All right, 9.3 is very simple. It's changing the amount of time that students who miss school and have to make up work. It's increasing the amount of time that they have from 1 week to 2 weeks, and this was based on recommendation by at least 2 of the policy committee members who work with students, that 2 weeks is a much more reasonable time frame. So that's the only change on this one. Any questions about that?
I've got one, Dr. Yeager. It doesn't, I looked at the policy, and the policy is very short and says that we see the need for provisions of opportunity, to make provision for students to make up work. What about students that are suspended? I don't see that addressed in the regulation. It doesn't exclude them, it doesn't include them.
I think this policy just talks about students who are absent. It doesn't talk about why they are absent. Mr. Harris?
Depends only on you, Mr. Gaskins, on this one.
Or Mr. Gaskins might want to be able to address it.
I'll do my best, Dr. Yeager. So it is our practice, Mr. Davis, to allow students who are suspended or a student for any reason to make up work. You are correct, it does not outline that in the policy, but it is our practice when students are not in school for whatever reason that they have the ability to make up missed assignments.
Okay, is that well established? And having been a counselor in a middle school and having to seek out work assignments for suspended students, it's, some teachers were just flat out have told me, this was years ago, that I'm not going to do that. So I just want to make sure that it's clearly established.
So I would need to do more research on that to see if it was clearly established. I would imagine that some of the work that we're going to do with student discipline, that's something that we can address with our restorative practice director.
I got a question about it. So, and it's not in there, but I just thought about it when you were talking. So, assignments, or being able to make up work, and now that we're doing virtual, about synchronous and asynchronous, will it matter which type of assignment it is?
It won't matter.
Okay.
Dr. Yeager?
Okay, if there are no other questions, we'll go to 9.5, which, 9.4, excuse me, which is about grading systems. This is a review only, there are no changes recommended for this policy. We did talk quite a bit about whether this policy needed to be updated according to state law. There is a state law that requires that grades 4 through 12 have a quantitative minimum, 70% as the minimum passing score, which this policy does not have for the 4th and 5th graders. But Mr. Gaskins informed us that that is one of the things that we are asking to raise as part of our charter status. So this policy should remain as it is. Any questions?
Probably not about the policy, I just saw this again, so 70 and below is failing,
Below 70, so 69
so
and
69
below.
and below is failing.
Yes, ma'am.
But we are choosing not to apply that quantitative number to 4th and 5th graders. Any other questions?
Not that
Okay,
I see.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Going to the next one, number 9.5, policy IDA is also basic program review only. Mr. Gaston said this is fine with, consistent with practice. Any questions about that one? 9.6 is the regulation that goes with the basic program, that has more details, as you can see, but this is also review only since it's still up to date. If there are any questions?
No, continue.
Sorry, I can't see you and I can't hear you.
Continue. They'll speak up if, we have a question. We'll try to speak up so you can hear us.
All right, thank you. So IHEB is number 9.7. All this is changing the superintendent only. So develop the guidelines to include her designee, which she approved in the meeting. So it's just allowing some flexibility on who actually approves the guidelines. And then the regs to go with it is 9.8, academic achievement. This one primarily discusses actually this is all about the gifted program, excuse me, and it changes the name of the gifted staff member from Director of Gifted Services to Coordinator of Advanced Content and Gifted Services. So that's just a name update. So both of those are pretty minor changes. Any questions about those two? Okay, moving forward, 9.9 is policy II, testing program. This was a it was a deletion of the final 6 or 8 lines, which had to do with a special education diploma, which I don't believe is current practice at all, but Mr. Gaston, maybe you can explain that, please.
That's correct. It's not a current practice, and we have addressed the special education student graduation, and I believe policy IHF, which is a policy that we revised, I believe this time last year.
Thank you. Are there any questions about that one? All right. Moving forward, 9.10 is policy IIB, test administration. This was a review only. No changes recommended by Mr. Gaskins, consistent with practice. The same is true for IKBA, controversial speakers. Again, no change recommended. This is consistent with current practice.
I have a question about one word in that first paragraph. Can you hear me better now if I take my mask off for a minute? In that first paragraph, I think the sentence reads toward the end, students, the second sentence, students need to study issues upon which there is disagreement and to practice analyzing problems, gathering and organizing facts, discriminating between facts and opinions. Should that be discerning? I'm not sure I understand discriminating between facts and opinions. Just that word. Maybe found it, and I just need to maybe go check my dictionary again. Seems like discerning would tell me more.
Yeah, let me pull out my dictionary and discerning might be a better word. Any other comments about that? Discerning is more appropriate probably because it discerns the differences between several things or two things. Yeah, I would be okay with switching out the string, if that would help. Anybody else have a concern or comment about that? I think that would be I think we're allowed to make technical changes to policies, small word changes like that without approval, but, and maybe we can fix that going forward. Any other questions about that one? Shall I move forward?
Yes.
Okay, so, I'm sorry, I can't hear. Okay, thank you. 9.12 or 9.12 is school ceremonies and observances. Again, this is a very minor change to add or designate behind the superintendent's approval. And this is just this policy is about mostly the Pledge of Allegiance and moments of reflection, not so much ceremony as observances. And again, it's just the time and manner of the Pledge of Allegiance shall be left to the discretion of the superintendent or designate. And I believe Dr. Thomas was happy with this change.
That's correct. Once we understood what ceremony was, I think we were good.
Okay. Okay, so we got through the first 12. The 9.13 is the one we've been discussing, actually. Dr. Gant mentioned it in her report, trying to revise the committee structure, board committee structure, to be more aligned with our strategic plan as discussed during the retreat. And this is the draft that I've shared with you probably at least a month ago, except for the addition of some input from the Government Relations Committee who met and rephrased what they thought new Government and Community Relations Committee should do. But otherwise, the rest of it is what I had sent to you about a month ago. And the overall structure is that we will now have 4 committees. The policy committee will remain the same, although we've added the word equity to our alignment. And then we've also added a thorough review every 5 years to the job of the policy committee. So there are some additions to what policy committee will do. The fiscal responsibility committee is, as we discussed, a combination of the finance committee and the property committee. And so it includes the fiscal responsibility of the finance committee's previous duties and is now combined with property.
And so, I believe that we have feedback from the director of operations that wants property committee to be a separate committee. Or we just not going to consider that?
I don't think he said that he wanted, this is Mr. Mr. Fisher speaking. He said that he didn't want the property committee to be abolished. He thought it was a useful committee. We're not abolishing it, we're just combining it with the fiscal responsibility, with the finance committee. So the committee will still exist for his purposes.
That's the standard instruction for, how we move forward.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Linda.
I really felt that I heard him say they needed to be separate, but that's, if it is the will of the board that you combine them, I recognize that I have that minority vote here.
Yeah, that's not my recollection that he said they needed to be separate. He just said that he wanted the committee to exist. So, and he wanted to have a family board for property issues prior to taking it to the full board. So this committee would absolutely be able to do that.
And I'm interested, Ms. Davis, what is your understanding of what Mr. Fisher asked for?
It was that it would be a committee, and again, if there was further discussion with Mr. Fisher and he agreed that it should be combined, then I say do that, but I think that these are two very large responsibilities, and to combine them under one committee means that we will probably do less with them. And again, we're making our committees smaller, so I'm feeling like that this would truly make this an ineffective relationship, but I'm willing to because we can always change it later. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely,
That's
absolutely.
what I've been hearing.
We don't have to stick with it.
I think it's a heavy load to ask to have one committee handle these two major subjects. But that's just my opinion, so I really support it. That's it, thank you.
Well, let's see, I mean, I guess I would see how it works. The comments we had early on was that the finance committee was, having a lot of repetition, and so maybe that part of their load can be lightened, and that was one of the goals, is to not have to do the finance meetings as often, or at least as long, so that the information, presented to the full board doesn't have to be necessarily presented in such detail to the subcommittee. I don't know, that's what I was hearing. I haven't attended finance committee meetings, so I don't know how they work. I do know property committee doesn't meet very often, so. But yeah, certainly, if this doesn't work, I'm not wedded to this. This is the summary of what I'm hearing from everyone. So then I guess I would, moving down to, the provision of the government and community relations, this comes straight from the Government Relations Committee. They worded it, I've just copied and pasted directly from them and replaced the text that I had tried to cobble together. So this is a much nicer summary of the goals of the Government and Community Relations Committee, I think. And then finally, the other committee, the fourth committee that we have created, is a replacement of the Superintendent Evaluation Committee with an Accountability Committee. What I understood from the folks that were on the Superintendent Evaluation Committee was that it was a periodic necessity to do this evaluation, twice a year, and that they would have time during the rest of the year to look into the climate assessments and some of the other assessments that the full board is asked to look at, and they would have a chance to look at those. These are for the people that really want to dig down deep into the data, so that we've given them that responsibility. And then I think finally, I did get some feedback about the advisory committee structure, which is at the bottom, that I did not touch. This is straight from the previous version of the policy, but I understand, I think Dr. Anderson wanted to discuss how this is framed and whether we want to keep this as it was in the past or whether we want to modify it. So I would turn it over to her to explain.
So I guess I just needed some clarity on what exactly the advisory committee is for. And if it's a committee that is in any way assessing, sorry, I have food stuck in my throat, that is assessing our governance, right? Like we talked about forming committees to look into our own function as a board and things like that, that Cognia asked us to do. And I'm wondering, is that what this advisory committee is, or is this something completely separate from that? And if it is dealing with any level of governance of the board, then it shouldn't be appointed by the board. It should be externally appointed. It should be externally appointed, perhaps by the district or LSGTs or community members self-appointing, but the board should not have participation in choosing members of committees that are gonna oversee or give opinion or thoughts on their function. So that, I just wanted a little bit of clarity on what this advisory committee is.
So I have never seen this committee invoked, or this part of the policy invoked, but I've only been on the board for a short time. My understanding of this was if we wanted to have a collection of people, particularly from the community, to advise us on some topic external to our own performance, like perhaps, the hiring of a new superintendent, not to say that we're going to do that anytime soon, but, or I don't know, something else in terms of advising us, not so much about ourselves, but about, guidance on the strategic plan or guidance guidance on the charter system, things like that. But that's just my intuition, my read of it. Some of the board members that have been on for longer, have we ever invoked these advisory committees in your tenure?
Well,
What do they look like?
my experience is that the superintendent has. I know I was part of an advisory committee on bilingual students and their families that Dr. Means organized. And from there, we got the equity policy. But I think that maybe, if the board took the initiative and saw the need to form something, I think it's just a piece that I've never seen used, and Linda may have.
So the only committee that I served on before I came on the board was the community committee, and I think that was one that the board and the superintendent together created, and that was like a community-wide, again, another advisory committee, if you will. And so that happens periodically, and I don't know if the advisory committees that we have for the Career Academy would come under this, because we do have those boards that we've created out of that. And maybe out of those places we form things, but this is truly, I think it was internally focused in terms of the power of the board to recognize that we may not have expertise in some areas, and we may need to invite that level of expertise from a different place to help us, or to help us move through some things. And there'll be a couple of times I wanted one. So yeah, I think it's fine as it is, but I really like your caveat that the board should not appoint a committee to investigate itself. That's kind of strange to me. So I would like to see that limit maybe placed in here.
I also read it as you did, Linda and Tish, that it was to be if we didn't have the expertise that we wanted or needed, and wanted to engage people from the community to help us out with something specific. But I do think in reading Cognia's report, most recent report, they do discuss this part, and it seemed to me that they were thinking of it in a different way, or at least we really need to define what this means so that we can be sure that we're doing what it says and what we're saying that it says, because it seemed like that was an issue that they had with the way that we were using committees, not just the stuff we've talked about already, but they did specifically talk about the use or non-use of advisory committees. And I think that they probably do want us to have an advisory committee that is giving feedback on board performance. So maybe it could be both of those things, or maybe we need to separate it out and have advisory committees for specific projects, and then also like a board advisory committee.
I would go so far as to say what I read in that report was the monitoring or the evaluation of the board's performance, and I don't know that would take an advisory committee to do that. I think that becomes a part of the district's work, and as they collect information like they do for the climate surveys and things of that nature, and I don't think that would take a committee necessarily to do that particular function. And that was what I read into that, is that, we do need that ongoing monitoring. And so I think we're in contract now with GSBA to do those surveys for us. That may be useful. But I don't think we need a committee to evaluate that. So I wouldn't think that would be a case necessarily. But I think we do need the flexibility to do that, because there are things like, even in looking at some big decisions that we may have to make, it would be appropriate if we're going to do more with community schools, we're going to do more with some new initiatives that are coming in the pipe. We might want to look at, bringing in some expertise from outside and directing that expertise. The particular one that I worked on was one looking at inequities in the community. It was like a racial clarification thing where they were looking at trying to do more with equity
our report, there were two standards that spoke to this. One was the standard, the leadership standard 1.4. And under that fifth directive, it says, establish means to routinely gather, analyze, and use stakeholder perception data on effectiveness of the board. And then the leadership standard 1.6, the second directive, says use the advisory committee structure to effectively gather feedback to help all board members receive the same information prior to rendering decisions. And so, yeah, and so it seems like this would capture that. It seems like it's sort of twofold. One is the gathering the information, but then when we do have advisory committees, that we are sure that those advisory committees, or at least the findings or the feedback, is shared with the entire board, so there's not a perception that, certain people on the board have access to certain information. That was my interpretation, Dr. Thomas.
That was my understanding as well.
So would there be an external committee that we're looking at, or an internal? Because that's the piece that kind of, when I hear what you're saying, when I read that, I'm like, are we looking internally, are we looking at hiring somebody externally to do this work?
I think that's left up to us. One thing they have said is that it does not have to be, it needs to be something that's sustainable. That we, of course, we don't want to get in a place where we're hiring people forever. So I think a lot of it is up to us. They did not specify, the who, other than saying, they gave us examples of, like how certain school districts or superintendents may gather an advisory committee, but that we could also certainly use some of the committees and, organizations that we have to also, build that. From my understanding of the conversations with GSBA as well, their process includes, it doesn't necessitate that there is an advisory committee, but it does make use, if there is an advisory committee or already established groups that can provide feedback. But it starts with getting feedback from the entire community, and then I think it narrows down to a more focused group, which could be an advisory group or some other group that consists of stakeholders.
So I originally thought that that's what they wanted, was for us to gather this stakeholder input, and I didn't think that it had to be a committee, but in this latest report it says, the board has not created advisory committees to gather stakeholder input and to inform decision making. And then the directive is to utilize the advisory committee structure to effectively gather feedback to help all board members receive the same information prior to rendering decisions. So I don't know if we can get more clarification from them, because I agree that I don't think it's necessary to form a committee to get stakeholder feedback, but I also don't want to not do it if that's the thing that they're saying that we need to do.
Well, and I think based on the conversation that we had with GSBA, that would be a part of their process. I mean, I don't know that it would be like a specific, advisory committee or a group that, Dr. Thomas creates, or it could be a group that Dr. Thomas and the board creates. But if the focus of that group is to provide feedback about our functioning, my interpretation was that they weren't as hung up on, okay, was this an advisory committee that came through the board? But I'm happy to ask, I think we'll have a meeting soon.
I was about to say, we'll have a meeting hopefully at the beginning of next week, and we can get some additional clarity from Dr. Schaefer on what their intent was.
So we walk away from that with that action item kind of outlined, so that we don't have to revisit this one, because I think it's time for us to say, we're gonna have an advisory committee, and, let's talk about how we find those people and put them together, and let's just lay that out so that we don't have to, I'm ready. Because this seems like something that we can get done pretty quickly.
Yeah, I agree.
So again, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear Linda very well, but I think what I'm hearing is we need to work on the advisory committee paragraph, or we need to figure out as a board how we want to use the advisory committee paragraph. But I also understand that right now we have this sort of limbo land without our committees formed, and so I guess I would recommend that we pass or push this forward and get it approved so that we have our new committee, which is also part of the response to Cognitive, and then revisit the advisory committee paragraph down the road after we get some clarity. I know that we revised this policy less than 6 months ago, so this one comes up on the policy committee fairly often. I wouldn't mind revisiting it again, but I also know that we're sitting on a decision to change our committee structure and not getting it passed through, so. I don't think there's anything fundamentally wrong with our advisory committee paragraph. We just haven't been using it properly, I don't think, but that's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with that. But I mean, these are going out for public comment for the next month, right, so.
Yeah, we can also modify it when we get it back to public comment, yeah.
Well, I definitely agree. Having, Government Relations Committee has not had a quorum for the last couple of meetings, so I certainly think we need to put things in place and have people decide what committees they want to serve on, and so that at least the Community Relations Committee can do its work.
What's your quorum? Because I think we're down to, didn't we say 2 people per committee now?
Yes, I think we've had conversations about who would serve on the new revised committees. Now, whether we need to revisit that in the future, but that was a document that I think was shared with us by Ms. Palmer, or maybe even you, Dr. Yeager. It has let's see, I had it pulled up here. Yes, it has, at the top, it's called 2021 Board Committees. And it has, it's a reflection of the retreat conversation, if I'm not mistaken, but it lists the members that will be on each of these revised committees.
And I understand that, but my understanding was that was going to be implemented when the new committee structure was established.
Right.
So we still haven't established the new committee structure.
Right.
So I was functioning as chair under the old committee structure, of which we had 4 members, and then we had 2 of those members step off the board and were replaced by 2 other members.
Okay, and so it sounds like your concern then would be with the current committee, the people who are serving on the Government Relations Committee as it is right now. Is
But
that
I
correct?
think there might be confusion among 1 or more members if they're, am I on the committee, am I not on the committee? So and I'm confused now.
Yeah, I'll speak to that, because I think recently I remember that I was on that committee when I was very dutiful to the policy committee. So yeah, that one is on me.
So I think there is confusion. So anyway, I'm just saying that so that, just to justify moving this forward, pushing this out, that's all I'm advocating for.
Okay, and just for clarification, as it stands right now, we do have a document of the committees. And so I guess what the suggestion would be for all of us to take a look at the current committees. We have 2 documents. One is titled CCSD committees, and that includes the current makeup of our current committees before they were revised. And as we discussed, they will remain that way until we complete the policy that is related to committees. And then we have another document that's called 2021 Board Committees. And that is what it will look like once we assume our new roles. And so that original document, the CCSD committees, we can just take a look at those. And so those are all of the members of our current committees as they exist right now. And it can be confusing because we're sort of in transition, but one way to look at it is that we are just continuing with our old committees, minus, we replaced a couple of people.
That was my understanding, and that's why we haven't had a quorum for what is currently the Government Relations Committee, because we have 4 members and we've only had 2 attend at the last 2 meetings.
Okay, and so maybe, it sounds like what you may want to do as chair of that committee, maybe is reach out to those 4 members, maybe, as a reminder, or you may already do that.
I have done that.
Well, then maybe if you feel like it's been like, maybe a problem over the past couple of months, although hopefully we won't have to continue more than 2 or so more months, but if that person may need to rotate off, or, there needs to be some small changes to that so that you all will have a forum or what have you. But you all can have that conversation, because I'm not familiar with who.
I'm just pushing that this go out for public comment.
Oh, okay.
This particular policy.
Okay,
That's
so
all I'm
that's not a
saying.
problem that you're trying to.
No, I'm not. I'm just trying to give urgency,
Okay.
a sense of urgency.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. So I guess, I would recommend we push this forward and, get public comment on it, and if we need to make some tweaks, we can do that, either next week or preferably after it's come back from public comment at the next work session. So it's 9:48, shall I just finish with the last 3 policies that we discussed today in policy committee? And ask you to look at those and consider those, or shall we stay discussing the committee structure?
No, we should move on to the. I mean, that's just my opinion.
Order breakfast.
Thank you. All right, so, 9.14 is a request from Dr. Thomas to revise our public participation in board meetings. This one was probably inspired by 3 hours of letters we read not too long ago, and all of us being completely exhausted by the time the board meeting is coming to a very critical vote. So we talked about this quite a bit. We would like to reduce the amount of time during a board meeting to 30 minutes devoted to public comment. And we are also asking that those public comments be submitted not just an hour or 2 hours before the meeting, but 24 hours before the meeting, which is consistent with state law, in order to give all board members time to read all the letters, not just the number of letters that are coming in that can be read in 30 minutes. So if we get letters that are beyond, actually, I think we changed it to 45, didn't we? I'm reading an old version. Sorry, I think we changed it to 45 minutes devoted to public comment.
That's correct.
And, yeah, and then the 24 hours prior to the meeting to give us time to look over all the letters, and read all the letters in case some of them might, impact how we voted on something, that's coming up at that meeting. So we don't wanna just read the first 45 minutes and then not look at the other ones. We wanna read all of them before the meeting, but we just don't wanna read all of them aloud or have someone speaking aloud for 3 hours. So in order to accommodate that, we've done 2 things. Number 1, we've asked for groups to designate a single spokesperson, so people come together and set one letter. The other thing that we've done is to recommend that all public comments received by the deadline, and to those that cannot be accommodated, will become part of public record, so they'll either be appended to the minutes, if possible, or perhaps they would just be posted on a website somewhere, whichever is more efficient for the district, for Lisa or whoever's going to do this. So we would have the public comments available to others to read, so everybody would know what was said, but they might not be read aloud during the meeting. And all of these changes are consistent with policies in other neighboring school districts. I'm not sure who did it, but Dr. Thomas provided us with a long list of other district policies that are along these lines. And the 30 minutes or 45 minutes was very common.
I was able to listen to y'all's meeting while I was working in the yard. And I know you discussed, it was a quite lengthy discussion the policy committee did. The one thing that I don't see in here is, you know, I think it needs clarification that it's the first 10 folks or the first, I mean, you know, in terms of how that 30 minutes is utilized by whom. And so is it implied that it will be the first come, first served?
I think that's what we were thinking, but I know Attorney Hall also argued that we might not want to do it that way because of access issues. So I don't know that we had actually implemented that part of the policy yet.
That's correct. I think we're going to have to flesh out how to do that because of the concern that sometimes the same individuals may have access to resources where they can sit and be ready the minute, you know, it opens and send it in, and we will have redundancy in who we hear from and not have opportunity for other voices to be heard, even though everyone will be heard by the board members, because we will share those letters with them and we will also post them on our website. But the opportunity to have those remarks read is something that we're going to have to think through process-wise how we want to address that.
Yeah, and I think Mr. Pruitt's point was that we can't read the letter and then decide whether or not to read the letter aloud. That would be illegal. So we do have to come up with a way to do this, but I think we all kind of figured we could create a reg, maybe down the road after we see how this works. I don't know, if it was, there was some urgency to get this sort of across the board, because of the issue.
And if I'm correct, I think you were requesting that this not begin to July 1. So that may give us some time because we don't want to give the perception that we're trying to prevent people from sharing concerns during this pandemic. So that gives us a few months, a couple of months at least, to begin working on regs that we can bring back to the board.
I would ask us to tread lightly on this one because it is really concerning to me that we have cognitive intelligence, we're not listening to the advisory board, we're not receiving feedback and comment, and so I know that this is a stretch, but I would really love for us to think about this one a little bit more, and find a way that, even if you reduce it to 2 minutes, I really feel strongly that it's important that we give people voice.
And ironically, in my most recent conversation with Copia, they said we need to be able to conduct the business of the board, and they feel that we have been inhibited in doing that because of the 3 hours, 2 hours that we're not focusing. So that's actually one of the conversations I've had with them as well. But they reminded us that this is a meeting of the board, not, and with the people, not of the people.
Absolutely.
And so that was one of the things that prompted me to actually bring this forward, was the conversation with them.
So then I would look for us to find a place where that we can have those exchanges where we're there just to listen. Because I think it's important that we
That was one of the
pay
things.
closer attention to, what the community has to say so that we don't go down these roads.
Yes, and that was one of the things that Attorney Lowe brought up to move forward as well.
I would say, sorry, go ahead.
I'm fine with no public comment as long as we provide a forum for the public to comment and have a communication with us. I'm perfectly fine with that. So again, I just need for us to be absolutely equitable and open to the people that elected us so that they can actually have a dialogue. Yes, I'm sorry, I'm talking.
I'll follow up with that point very briefly. As we just think especially since we're in the pandemic. And I think the way the policy is written, it makes a assumption that everyone is literate and can produce a letter, produce an email, and they have access to get that to the appropriate place to have their voice heard. So I don't really think it gives everybody an equal shot to be able to get that through. And as we just develop our policy, I want that to be at the forefront of our minds.
See, and that was a little, and I heard you say that, Attorney Earl, but it was confusing because without the pandemic, what would happen is that some people would give us written comment, but all they would do is put their name down. They would just call up and say, I want to speak. And so Ms. Palmer would write her name down, and so they would do it in that order. The one thing that I was thinking about as I was listening to the policy committee today is if we have 45-minute time limit, then it would seem like, and we know 24 hours ahead of time who's speaking, then if we just kind of equally divided up that time, because if it's happened, the times that we've gone on and on, it's been on things like school closing or the previous, actions taken around the previous superintendent, and so, so there's going to be a lot of repetitiveness, or with the bus drivers, they came to us one time in mass, and so if you have 45 minutes and you have 30 speakers, then everyone gets a minute and a half. But no one ever has more than 3 minutes. But it just seems to me that way everybody would have a chance, but you would hear this repetitiveness that I think Linda's getting at, where the public is definitely stirred up about something, and everybody in the public has an opportunity to voice their opinion.
Go ahead, Tasha.
Well, I was just going to say, one of the things we talked about, or at least Gerald in my brain, is that if we see that we're getting dozens of letters on an issue, I think it was Attorney Hall who recommended that we have a town hall separate from the board meeting to listen to people's comments, that we not try to squeeze that into a board meeting because of the time constraints and the efficiency that we need to have in a board meeting. And I thought that was a brilliant idea. So that could be part of the reg that we let Dr. Thomas develop. So this sets the policy, and then how we actually implement it still needs to be developed. And partly after we see how it goes, too, right? If we get, if we get 10 letters like we got last month, we'll be fine. It won't affect anybody. And if we get 60, then we know we've got an issue. We should probably have a town hall.
I just have a couple of points. One is that I think that I liked Linda's idea of maybe like reducing it down to 2 minutes a person, because I do think that people want to be heard, and if we could hear more people in the same amount of time, I think that would be preferable to hearing fewer people who speak for longer, even if they end up saying the same things. Like there is something to the fact that like 20 people all want to talk about the same thing. And then I like the town hall idea, except that a lot of times people are coming to give public comment for something that we're about to vote on, and I don't think that it would be possible to organize a town hall around that particular issue if we have to vote on it. And then the third thing is that I understand the 24 hours requirement, but if our agendas, I guess our agenda would be up because we would already have had the work session, but I just want to make sure that people who want to make a comment are aware of the things that are going to be voted on in that meeting before because that's what people want to comment on. So I wouldn't want an agenda to be posted 24 hours and then say that you have to have your comment in by 24 hours. But I guess that wouldn't really happen since we have a work session, so you can forget that part.
And so I wonder, because this, the goal is for this to be effective July, if this might be something that may need to go back to the committee to flesh out more details, or either on the front end or the back end. So if it's pushed out now, then I guess when we receive those comments, if there's additional work that needs to be done. But it seems like we have a little bit, just a little bit of push to discuss these a little bit more. I do want to make us aware of the time. We're almost at 10 o'clock. Oh, is it 10:02? Okay, we're after 10 o'clock.
I'm sorry, everyone here had a shot yesterday, and they are.
Yes, yes. Okay, and we probably. Yes. Thank you, Albert. Okay, and we should probably, be trying to move, a little bit quicker through these next few items. So, Dr. Yeager, I don't know where that leaves us with, BCBI, but if the board is okay with pushing it out now and doing the work on the back end or whatever.
Okay. Yeah, okay, all right, well, the remaining policies that we have are, 9.15, is a new policy that is required by state law. This is a state law that the teachers lobbied heavily for. It's the creation of a grievance, or a, what's the word, the ability to, respond to a negative, review and appeal, thank you, an appeal process for teachers who get, negative reviews. And so, I believe, HR put together, basically the recommended text, directly from GSBA. GSBA had told us, we knew this was coming down the pike, and GSBA told us about the need to do this policy before July 1st. And they also said that they would send the sample out for everyone to use. And we looked at the sample, and we talked about the sample, and we think mostly the sample is fine, except for the part about a potential third-party person to do this review or to deal with this appeal. One of the things I hear from teachers is that they would really like an independent person to decide whether the appeal is valid or not, at least in some cases. And so we added, the policy as written from GSBA included a sentence about the discretion of the superintendent allowing for a qualified third party. And so we just took that and added the phrase "or at the request of the teacher," not mislead it to the superintendent, but if the teacher makes the request for the qualified third party to do this, make this decision. Because I know that that's what I'm hearing from teachers, that they wanted to have the ability to have an independent judge. So otherwise, the rest of the policy is straight from what the GSBA has recommended. And so if there are any comments, happy to take them. Otherwise, we can move to KG and KGR1, which is a response. Remember, KG came across the board earlier in the year, and there was quite a bit of discussion about how school facilities are being made available or not being made available to organizations, nonprofit organizations who work with our kids. And my sense is that adding this sentence will satisfy those concerns, while also acknowledging that the system isn't necessarily broken. Most of the time, these nonprofits are given use of the facilities for either minimal cost or low cost or no cost in some cases. But there's been a little bit of, I guess, Dr. Thomas, help me out with the word.
In the absence.
Miscommunication?
Yes, in the absence of Mr. Fisher, he recognized, as was the case in other people in his position in the past, and in his absence, the applications have been handled by someone who was not aware. And it's just been more clerical, just going through and putting the standard price on there. And so it was lack of awareness. So it really wasn't so much of an issue with our policy, it was just knowing the practice.
Yeah, so we're putting it, we're codifying it so that these nonprofit organizations who work with the kids are now considered school-related groups, even though they're not CCSD organizations, but if they're serving the youth and they're nonprofit, then they get to be put under this classification, which then in the reg, allows them to not, they have first priority or second priority, excuse me, and then the fees. The fee exhibit, I think is something the board isn't really gonna do because it's an exhibit. We'll just count on the district to update the fee schedule appropriately. So I guess, Mr. Davis in particular, is this, good enough for the concerns you have?
He's giving you a thumbs up.
All right, that's great, because I can't see him. Just so you know for future, this calling in thing is really sucks. I won't do it again, I promise. All right, I think that's the end of the policies that we are recommending to be put up for public comment.
That's right, and so we can move forward, with item number, item 10. These are our policies to be adopted, rescinded, and revised, and we've gone through, you've gone through most of these, and we, had the opportunity to discuss, but I will turn the floor over to you in case there's any new information or any new questions.
I don't believe we've had any public comment. I will ask Mr. Harris if he's still there, but he usually tells me if we have public comment, and I did not hear that we did from him today, so.
I asked him.
No public comment.
Not have any comments.
Okay, Dr. Thomas said that she asked him, and we do not have any new public comments.
Great, okay. So then I would just recommend that we approve those.
Okay?
Okay, I'm done.
All right, well, thank you very much, Dr. Yeager, for that overview, and board members for your feedback. We'll move forward with, item or section 11 and items 11.1, 11.2, and 11.3. Dr. Thomas, is there any additional information that you would like to provide about these?
No, ma'am, all of the items that are there, have been shared with you. The job descriptions were shared in advance, and those are all the jobs that were presented tonight. The only one that was not presented was the one that was going to take the place of my chief of staff position, but we just reduced the grade level on that one, and that's the strategic project coordinator position. But it was also in your packet last week. It was just not one that was presented tonight because it was not necessarily an ad.
Okay.
It was just replacing, but we just lowered the grade of the position.
Okay.
Okay.
And these were all, just to be clear, these were positions that were new, and that is why they had to
Yes,
come
ma'am,
across
that's
to us.
correct. So the governance and flexibility is the one with the charter, extended learning, virtual and extended learning, because we have not had our own virtual school in the past, community schools. The math coordinator, we had one some years back, but we just wanted to be transparent, because if you all recall, Linda Huff used to be the secondary math coordinator, but then, about 5 years ago, that title changed, so it's really a return back, because looking at our math scores, we really need someone who focuses on K-5 and 6-12. So that's not technically new, but it's a return, and again, we just wanted to, be transparent in those, additions or returns. Restorative justice, all of the others were explained. Trauma-informed specialist is the one that's more of a mental health counselor. So all of these were only being brought because they're new titles or returning something back.
Right, and just to be clear, I think, because I know when I initially was reading through, you mentioned this earlier, Dr. Thomas, that it may seem sort of top-heavy, but these are not the only positions that will be added by the funding, and we've seen that through the budget presentation.
Yes, ma'am. Even now, we're adding 42 building level positions. So these are pretty minimal, just the 42 in the flex positions. We're adding to schools, so those are all school-based. The psychologists are, they're district assigned, but they are assigned to schools. So the majority of the positions that are currently being added, plus the 40 plus positions that we're leaving, are being left at schools. So yes, you're correct.
I've just got one question.
Yes, sir.
Are we specifying on the job description that they are equivalent to being grant funded, letting people know that if they're applying, that it may be a shorter duration than a career?
Yes, sir, I've asked Dr. Blankenship to make sure that occurs, yes.
Because I'm looking at one now, I don't see it, but maybe there's somewhere else it's listed.
Okay.
And if we have additional questions about any of this, I would encourage us to follow up, particularly if there are any concerns or, just needed to discuss and have a fuller understanding, particularly since it's coming sort of before the budget.
Yes. And these are the descriptions, but when we actually do the postings, Mr. Davis, that information will be on the actual posting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so just to kind of pull together everything that everybody just said, my 3 things that I was interested in, and I'll send an email to follow up so that you have it, but I wondered for each of these positions, what the salary ranges were and whether they were gonna be funded through the general fund or through one of these CARES or ARPA.
And all of those should have been listed, Dr. Dykeman, on the presentation tonight. It told you what fund source they were coming out of. They were all either shown whether they were general fund or CARES funding. That was on tonight's presentation.
Okay.
That each department did.
And then my last question about each of these positions, since a lot of them are new, are who currently does these functions? Or if it's a brand, I mean, I know some of them are like brand new, but, just in general.
And actually, they all are except the coordinator of 612 math. We have one person, Deslin Culliter, who has been doing K-8, and what Mr. Gaskin shared earlier, the high schools have been left to their own kind of having to figure out the curriculum for 9-12, because Ms. Huff used to do 6-12, and then that position had been vacated a few years back. The rest of these are actually all new. So I think from your 3 questions, the one I need to get an answer for you on is the salary. If it doesn't have a grade, do they not have a grade listed on it? If they don't, I can get that information for you.
Since this has come up several times, I'm wondering if on the budget presentation, maybe 2 slides could be added that show very clearly what the new staff and administrative positions are gonna be, like on one slide, and the cost to the overall budget of those positions, and whether they're hard money and soft money, and whether they're teachers or administrators.
Okay. Can you send that to me via email?
Yeah, I was gonna send it to you via email anyway, it just seems to be coming up over and over. Yeah.
All right. Are there additional questions about any of those 3 items under our personnel recommendations that will be placed on next week's agenda to take action
I think the
on? All right, well, yeah, just be sure to reach out or send questions if you have those. We'll move forward, Dr. Thomas, with those items 11.1, 11.2, 11.3. Is that everything?
Yes, ma'am, we'll get that information that was requested. I'll get those salaries, Dr. Dykeman, and then I'll wait for those questions from Dr. Anderson, and we will get that on a 1 or 2 page document.
Okay, and so we'll move to section 12. This is our consent agenda, and so I'll go through each item, and if you see something that you would like removed, just say remove. That because if one person wants it removed, we'll remove it from the consent agenda. 12.1, these are our March 4th work session minutes. All right. 12.2, our March 11th board meeting minutes. 12.3, approving field trips. 12.4, approving the purchase and installation of bipolar ionization units.
Those are the devices that we mentioned earlier that will help to bring all of our rooms hopefully up to standard. Standards we've said, they're not the low standards now, but we have higher standards, so we'll be clear about
Okay, 12.5, the purchase of our 4 new Bluebird propane buses.
State has given bond funds to schools to purchase buses, and you can see that in the document. We'll receive $308,880 from the state, and then the other funds will come from, GDOE alternative fuel funds, SPOS funds, and then general funds, and that's broken down.
All right. 12.6, the intent to apply for a Head Start, early Head Start cost of living adjustment. 12.7, the intent to apply for Head Start, early Head Start carryover. 12.8, the action to approve a resolution approving the local facilities 5-year plan.
Pull it just so I can understand what I'm looking at.
Okay, all right.
We did meet with the state and a team of 4 other administrators from across the state who came in and reviewed the 5-year plan. And we can have Mr. Gilbert to be prepared. If you'll send me any questions, if you have any after you've read it, so that I can get those to Mr. Gilbert. Yes, that's the one that would be cool, yes.
It was the 12.8.
Everything else is consent.
All right, we'll move to section 13.1, which is adjournment. The floor is open.
So moved. Second.